The envelope trembled in Ethan McCrae's calloused hands. Yellowed parchment sealed with wax, addressed in handwriting he'd recognize anywhere. Sarah's handwriting, his wife's handwriting, the woman he'd buried 10 years ago under the old oak tree. The stranger standing at his gate watched him with eyes that held secrets and sorrow. "She asked me to find you," the woman whispered. "She said you deserved to know the truth about what really happened." Everything Ethan thought he knew about his past was about to shatter like glass under a hammer's blow. "Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled." The August sun beat down merciless on Red Rock Ranch, turning the Colorado dust to powder that hung in the air like ghosts of better days. Ethan McCrae stood on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, one hand shading his eyes, the other resting on the post he'd carved himself 20 years back, when hope still ran thick in his veins. The wood was smooth now, worn by a decade of lonely sunsets and the weight of a man who'd forgotten how to dream. He was 43 but looked older, the kind of older that comes from the inside out, from carrying grief so long it becomes part of your bones. His face was weathered leather, creased at the corners of eyes that had once sparkled with laughter but now just watched. Watched the horizon. Watched the seasons turn. Watched for nothing in particular because nothing particular ever came. Until today. The rider appeared first as a shimmer in the heat waves, a dark speck against the bleached afternoon sky. Ethan squinted harder, his heart doing something it hadn't done in years, quickening with something that might have been curiosity, might have been dread. Nobody came to Red Rock Ranch. Not anymore. Not since Sarah. He watched the figure grow larger, more defined. A horse, chestnut-colored, moving at a steady walk. And atop it, a woman. Even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way she swayed slightly with the horse's rhythm, like someone who'd been riding too long, too far. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his hip, where a gun had once hung. But he'd put that away years ago, locked it in a drawer with other relics of a man he used to be. Instead, his fingers just brushed against his worn denim, and he waited. Waiting was something he'd gotten good at. The woman drew closer, and details emerged like a photograph developing in chemical baths. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark auburn hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. Her dress was a faded blue calico, travel-stained and dusty, the hem darker where road dirt had worked its way into the fabric. A single leather satchel was tied behind her saddle, bulging with whatever worldly possessions she carried. But it was her face that struck him when she finally came close enough to see clearly. Not beautiful in the conventional sense, but striking, all sharp angles and determined lines, with eyes that held a weight too heavy for someone so young. Dark eyes. Deep brown, almost black in the shadowed light. Eyes that had seen things, known loss, carried secrets. She reined in her horse about 20 feet from the porch, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled taut, vibrating with unspoken questions. A dust devil spun up in the distance, dancing across the barren field where Ethan once grew corn. Before. Everything in his life was measured that way now. Before Sarah, and after. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from disuse. He spoke to his ranch hands when necessary, to the shopkeeper in town on his monthly supply runs, but real conversation, the kind that required more than grunts and nods, that was a language he'd nearly forgotten. The woman dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Her boots hit the ground with a soft thud, and she stood there, one hand still on the horse's neck as if drawing strength from the animal's solid presence. She was taller than he'd thought, nearly 5'8", with a straight spine that suggested pride or stubbornness or both. "You're Ethan McCrae," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was low, melodic, touched with an accent he couldn't quite place. Southern maybe, but softened by time and travel. "That's right," he acknowledged, not moving from the porch. His instincts, dormant for so long, were suddenly alert. There was something about her, about the way she stood there with her shoulders squared and her jaw set, that told him this wasn't a social call. This was something else, something that mattered. "I came a long way to find you," she said, and her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the satchel tied to her saddle. 3 months on the road. Through Kansas, through the territories, following a trail that went cold more times than I can count. Ethan's chest tightened. I don't know you, ma'am, and I can't think of any reason someone would travel 3 months just to find a washed-up rancher in the middle of nowhere. Can't you? The woman's eyes locked on his, and in them he saw something that made his breath catch. Compassion mixed with sorrow, knowledge mixed with pain. I came with a letter, Mr. McCrae. From who? The question came out sharper than he meant, defensive. He didn't get letters, hadn't gotten one in years. The few people who'd once cared to write had long since given up on the man who never wrote back. The woman's fingers worked at the leather straps of her satchel, and Ethan found himself watching those fingers with an intensity that surprised him. They were long, elegant despite the calluses, and they moved with a slight tremor that told him whatever she was about to show him, it cost her something to do it. She pulled out an envelope, old, yellowed with age, the edges soft and worn as if it had been handled many times. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Sarah used to use for her correspondence with her sister back east, the kind she'd kept in the cherrywood box on her writing desk, the box that now sat empty in Ethan's bedroom, gathering dust like everything else in his life. The woman held it out to him, but he didn't take it, couldn't take it. Because even from where he stood, even in the harsh afternoon light that bleached the color from everything, he could see the handwriting on the front. Graceful, flowing, with that distinctive way of looping the E in Ethan that had always made him smile. Sarah's handwriting, his wife's handwriting, the handwriting of a woman who'd been dead and buried for 10 years. No. The word came out strangled, caught between his throat and his heart. That's not possible. I know how this looks, the woman said quietly, taking a step forward. I know what you must be thinking. But I promise you, this is real. Ethan's legs felt weak. He gripped the porch post harder, his knuckles white with the strain. Where did you get that? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a decade's worth of grief and confusion and a sudden, terrible hope that he didn't want to feel. From her, the woman said simply. From Sarah McCrae, your wife. The world tilted, Ethan's vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment he thought he might actually fall. 10 years. 10 years since he'd lowered Sarah's coffin into the ground, since he'd stood in the rain with mud on his boots and tears mixing with the weather on his face. 10 years since he'd carved her name into the headstone himself because he couldn't bear to let anyone else do it. My wife is dead, he said, and the words felt like stones in his mouth. I buried her myself under the oak tree. I put her in the ground with my own hands. I know, the woman said, and tears gleamed in her dark eyes. She told me you did. She told me everything. Ethan's mind reeled. This was madness, impossibility, some kind of cruel trick, though he couldn't imagine who would be cruel enough or what they'd gain from it. He had nothing, was nothing, just a man waiting out his days in a house full of ghosts. You need to leave, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, his eyes were drawn back to that envelope, to that handwriting. Take your letter and whatever game you're playing and— It's not a game, the woman interrupted, her voice firm now, cutting through his protests. And I'm not leaving. Not until you read this. Not until you know. Know what? Ethan nearly shouted, and the sound shocked him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd raised his voice. What could I possibly need to know about a woman who's been dead for 10 years? The woman climbed the porch steps then, each footfall deliberate, purposeful. She moved like someone who'd made up her mind about something difficult and wasn't about to be swayed. When she reached the top, she was close enough that Ethan could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the sun damage on her cheeks, the set of her jaw that spoke of determination born from necessity. You need to know that you didn't lose everything, she said softly, holding out the envelope again. You need to know that some part of what you had survived, and you need to know that she loved you so much that with her dying breath, she made me promise to find you. Ethan's hand moved of its own accord, reaching for the envelope. His fingers brushed the woman's as he took it, and he felt a jolt. Not romantic, not electric, but something deeper. Recognition of some kind. A sense of connection that made no sense, and every sense all at once. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, weighted with more than just paper and ink. The seal on the back was broken, the red wax cracked and crumbling, but he could still make out the impression. A rose, Sarah's favorite flower, pressed into the wax from the signet ring her father had given her. How? The question was all he could manage. How did this exist? How did this woman have it? How was any of this real? Read it, the woman urged. Please, I've carried it across half the country. I've protected it through storms and river crossings and nights when I thought I'd never find you. Just read it. Ethan's hands shook as he turned the envelope over. His name was written there in Sarah's careful script. Ethan McCrae, Red Rock Ranch, Colorado Territory. Below it, in smaller letters, to be delivered in the event of my death. His vision swam. The porch seemed to sway beneath his feet. This couldn't be happening, couldn't be real. But the paper in his hands was real, the ink was real, and that handwriting, God help him, he'd memorize every loop and curve of Sarah's handwriting, had read her letters 1,000 times before the fever took her. Who are you? He asked the woman, looking up from the envelope to meet her eyes. How do you know about Sarah? How do you have this? The woman's expression shifted, pain and tenderness and something else, something that looked almost like fear. My name is Clara Dawson, she said, and Sarah McCrae saved my life when I was born. She was there in the mission hospital in Santa Fe when my mother died, bringing me into this world. She held me, Mr. McCrae. She was the first person to hold me. Ethan's mind struggled to process this. Santa Fe. Sarah had been in Santa Fe 10 years ago. She'd gone to visit her sister who'd married a merchant there. She'd been gone for 3 months, and when she came back she was different, quieter, sadder. She'd clung to him at night and cried in her sleep, and when he asked what was wrong, she'd just shaken her head and said some things were too painful to speak about. 2 months after she returned, the fever came. Started as a chill, became an inferno that no amount of cold compresses or prayer could fight. She died on a Tuesday morning while rain hammered the roof and Ethan held her hand and begged God for mercy that never came. Sarah was in Santa Fe, he said slowly, trying to piece it together. She visited her sister, but she never said anything about a baby, about a hospital. I know, Clara said. She made certain promises to certain people, promises she kept even when it cost her everything. What people? What promises? Ethan's voice rose again, frustration and confusion, and that terrible, treacherous hope all tangling together in his chest. Read the letter, Clara repeated. It's all in there. Everything you need to know. Everything she wanted you to know but couldn't tell you while she lived. Ethan looked down at the envelope again. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to tell this woman to leave and take her impossible letter and her mysterious story with her. Part of him wanted to preserve this moment forever, this last instant, before whatever was in that envelope changed everything. But he'd never been a coward. Sarah had loved that about him, his courage, she'd called it, though he'd never felt particularly brave. Just stubborn. Too stubborn to quit, even when quitting would have been easier. His fingers found the edge of the envelope's flap, worked under it carefully. The paper was fragile with age, and he didn't want to tear it. Couldn't bear to damage even this small piece of Sarah, this echo of her presence that had somehow found its way back to him across time and distance and death itself. The flap came free, and he pulled out the pages inside. 3 of them, covered front and back in Sarah's flowing script. The ink had faded to a soft brown, but the words were still legible, still clear, still her. His eyes found the opening line, and the world fell away. My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. It means the fever won, or the journey took me, or God decided he needed me more than you did. I'm so sorry, my love. Sorry for leaving you. Sorry for the secrets I kept. Sorry for everything I couldn't tell you when I had the chance. Ethan's knees buckled. He sat down hard on the porch steps, the letter trembling in his grip. Clara moved beside him, close enough to steady him if he fell but far enough to give him space. The gesture struck him as practiced, as if she'd imagined this moment many times and planned for every possibility. I need to tell you about Santa Fe, the letter continued, about what happened while I was there, about the choice I made, the choice I had to make, and what it cost me. Cost us. His heart hammered against his ribs. The sun beat down, insects buzzed in the dry grass, and somewhere in the distance, one of his horses whinnied. Normal sounds. A normal day. Except nothing would ever be normal again. My sister Margaret was with child when I arrived. You knew that. I told you I was going to help her through the birth. What I didn't tell you was that there was another woman at the mission hospital. A young woman, barely 20, who'd come to Santa Fe fleeing something terrible. She never told me what, but I could see it in her eyes, that haunted look of someone who'd survived something they should never have had to endure. Ethan's hands tightened on the pages. Sarah's voice came through the words so clearly he could almost hear her speaking them, could almost see her sitting at her writing desk with the lamplight golden on her face, her brow furrowed with concentration as she formed each letter. Her name was Catherine Dawson. She was alone. Ethan. No family, no money, no one to help her. And she was dying. The birth was going wrong from the start. I could see it, the midwife could see it, even Catherine knew it. She was too small, the baby was positioned wrong, and there was blood. So much blood. A chill ran down Ethan's spine despite the heat. He glanced up at Clara, who stood with her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the horizon as if she couldn't bear to watch him read. The midwife said we had to choose, Sarah wrote, the mother or the child. We couldn't save both. Catherine was fading fast, barely conscious, but when they told her, she opened her eyes and looked right at me. Save my baby, she said. Promise me you'll save my baby. Ethan's throat closed. He could picture it so clearly. Sarah in that hospital room, faced with an impossible choice, holding the hand of a dying stranger. I promised her, Ethan. I held her hand, and I promised. And then I helped the midwife bring that baby into the world while her mother bled out on the bed beside us. It was a girl, perfect and tiny and screaming with life, while her mother's voice went silent forever. Tears blurred Ethan's vision. He blinked them away, needing to see the words, needing to know. They wrapped the baby in a blanket and handed her to me. And Ethan, when I looked down at that tiny face, something broke open in my chest. You know we'd tried for children. You know how many times I'd prayed for a baby, how many nights I'd cried because my body wouldn't give us the family we wanted. He did know. It had been a sorrow they'd shared, a grief they'd carried together. Sarah had wanted children so badly it hurt to watch her around other people's babies, to see the longing in her eyes. I held Catherine's daughter, the letter continued, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Not just love, though God knows I loved her instantly, but purpose. Like maybe all those years of emptiness, all that wanting and praying and crying had been leading to this moment. This child who needed someone, this baby who would have died or been sent to an orphanage or God knows what if someone didn't step up. Ethan's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the pages. He knew what was coming, could feel it building like a storm on the horizon. I made a choice, Ethan. I made it in a moment, without thinking it through, without considering all the consequences. I told the midwife I would take her. I told them I would raise Catherine's daughter as my own. And for 3 weeks, I did. I stayed at the mission, caring for her, feeding her, learning how to be a mother to this child who'd been born from tragedy. The next words were smudged, as if tears had fallen on them while Sarah wrote. She was beautiful, Ethan. Is beautiful. Dark hair like her mother, but her eyes, they reminded me of yours. That same determined look, like she was ready to take on the world despite being so tiny and helpless. Clara made a sound, a soft, choked sob. Ethan looked up at her again, really looked, and suddenly he saw it. The shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw, features he saw in the mirror every morning, somehow translated onto the stranger's face. No, not a stranger. His hands fell to his lap, the letter crumpling slightly in his grip. You're the baby, he whispered. Catherine's daughter. Clara turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm the baby, she confirmed. The one your wife held. The one she loved. The one she what? Ethan demanded, surging to his feet. The letter fell from his hands, pages scattering on the porch. What did she do, Clara? What choice did she make? Clara's face crumpled. Read the rest, she pleaded. Please, you need to read the rest. Ethan grabbed for the pages, his hands clumsy with urgency. He found where he'd left off, Sarah's words swimming before his eyes. I wanted to bring her home to you, Ethan. God, I wanted it so badly. I imagined showing up at the ranch with this beautiful baby girl. Imagined the surprise on your face turning to joy. I imagined us raising her together, giving her the life her mother couldn't. Hope and dread warred in Ethan's chest. But then Margaret's husband came to the mission. He'd heard about what I was planning, and he sat me down and made me see the truth I didn't want to face. He told me about the law, about how a single woman, even a married woman, couldn't just take a child without proper procedures. He told me about Catherine's family, how they might come looking, how they might have legal claim even though they'd abandoned her. Ethan's stomach twisted. He told me about the danger, about men who preyed on women traveling alone with infants, about bandits and outlaws and the 1,000 ways the journey could go wrong. And then he asked me a question that changed everything. If you really love this child, what kind of life can you give her? What kind of mother can you be if you're always looking over your shoulder, always afraid someone will take her away? No, Ethan breathed. Sarah, no. I realized he was right, Ethan. As much as it destroyed me to admit it, he was right. I couldn't keep her, couldn't take her home, couldn't raise her as ours. It would have been selfish. It would have put her in danger, and I loved her too much to do that. The words blurred again, and this time Ethan didn't fight the tears that fell. So I made arrangements. There was a family in Santa Fe, good people, wealthy people who'd been trying for years to have a child. The wife was barren, like me, and they were desperate for a baby to love. I met with them. I vetted them as thoroughly as I could in 3 weeks, and in the end, I believed they could give her everything I couldn't. Safety, security, a legal claim no one could challenge, a name no one would question. She gave you away, Ethan said, looking at Clara with dawning understanding. She gave you to another family. Clara nodded, her face wet with tears. The Dawsons, they raised me, loved me, gave me a good life. But Sarah... Ethan turned back to the letter, desperate for answers. Why didn't she tell me? Why did she keep this secret? I couldn't tell you, Ethan. If I had, you would have insisted we bring her home anyway. You would have risked everything to do the right thing because that's who you are. You would have fought the law and public opinion and common sense itself to give that baby a home. And you might have won, or you might have lost, but either way the child would have been caught in the middle of a battle she never asked for. Ethan's chest ached. Sarah had known him so well, known exactly what he would have done. I told myself I was being noble, selfless. But the truth is I was a coward. I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in your eyes when you learned what I'd done, couldn't bear to watch you try to fix my mistake, couldn't bear to have you involved in my grief. It wasn't a mistake, Clara said softly. She saved my life. The Dawsons told me everything when I was old enough to understand. They told me about the brave woman who'd held me when my mother died, who'd loved me enough to let me go. They gave me your wife's name, told me where she'd gone when she left Santa Fe. They wanted me to know where I came from. So I gave her away. Sarah's letter continued. I signed the papers, handed her to her new mother, and I walked out of that mission with empty arms and a broken heart. I stayed with Margaret another week, but I barely remember it. I was hollow, numb. I'd held purpose in my hands and then released it because I was too afraid to hold on. Ethan closed his eyes, imagining Sarah's pain, the grief she'd carried alone. When I came home to you, I couldn't speak about it. Every time I tried, the words stuck in my throat. You held me at night when I cried, and you never pushed for answers I couldn't give. You just loved me, just held me. And I loved you all the more for it, even as I hated myself for keeping such a terrible secret. The fever, Ethan said suddenly, looking at Clara. Is that why she got sick? The grief? The stress? The doctors said her immune system was compromised, Clara answered. That sometimes emotional trauma can make a person vulnerable to illness, but we'll never know for sure. Ethan turned to the final page, hands trembling. I'm writing this now because I can feel something wrong inside me, Ethan. I don't know what it is, maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I have this sense that my time is running short. So I'm putting it all down, everything I couldn't say while I looked into your eyes. I'm trusting it to Margaret, making her promise that if anything happens to me, she'll find a way to get this letter to that little girl when she's grown, to Catherine's daughter, to the child I loved and lost. Because she deserves to know. Deserves to know that she was loved by someone other than her birth mother. Deserves to know that somewhere in the world, a woman held her and made impossible choices trying to do right by her. And she deserves to know about you. Ethan's breath caught. About the man I loved, the man I married, the man who would have been the most wonderful father if only I'd been brave enough to give him the chance. His vision went white at the edges. He gripped the porch railing to keep from falling. If you're reading this, it means she found you. It means Margaret kept her promise, and this letter made its way across the years to your hands. And I need you to know, Ethan, I need you to understand that every choice I made because I loved you. I loved you enough to protect you from my mistakes. Loved you enough to spare you the pain of impossible decisions. Loved you enough to let you remember me as I was, not as I became in those dark weeks in Santa Fe. The letter was nearly done now. Just a few more lines. But I also need you to know that you didn't lose everything when you lost me. That little girl, she carries something of us, even though we never raised her. She carries the love I felt when I held her, the hope I had for her future. And maybe, if you're willing, she could carry something of you too. I don't ask you to be her father. I don't ask you to make up for the years she lived without knowing your name. I just ask you to see her, to know her, to let her know that the woman who held her first, who loved her first after her mother died, was loved by a good man, a man worth knowing. Tell her about the ranch, about the horses you trained and the corn you grew and the dreams we had. Tell her about the life we built, the love we shared, the way you held me when the world got too heavy. Tell her that for all the wrong I did, for all the mistakes I made, at least I was loved by someone like you. The final words were barely legible, written in a shaking hand. I love you, Ethan McCrae. I loved you from the moment I met you until the moment I draw my last breath. And if there's any justice in heaven, I'll love you for eternity beyond that. Yours forever. Sarah. Ethan stood there on his porch, the letter clutched in his hands, and felt 10 years of carefully constructed walls come crashing down. The grief he'd buried, the anger he'd suppressed, the love he'd tried to forget, it all came flooding back in a wave so powerful it drove him to his knees. He sobbed. Great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. Cried for Sarah, for the child she'd loved and lost, for the secret that had poisoned her final months. Cried for himself, for the decade he'd spent alone thinking he'd lost everything, when, in truth, something had survived. Someone had survived. Clara knelt beside him, her hand tentative on his shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. I needed you to know. Needed to keep the promise I made. What promise? Ethan managed through his tears. When the Dawsons told me about Sarah, about what she'd done for me, I swore I'd find you someday. I swore I'd make sure you knew that her love, your love, it didn't die with her, that it lived on in me, in the life she made possible. Clara's voice broke. I spent 5 years searching for this letter. Margaret had died, and it was lost in her possessions. But I found it. I found it, and I knew I had to bring it to you. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, saw past the stranger, past the impossible situation, to the woman herself, to Catherine's daughter, to the baby Sarah had held and loved and let go. How old are you? He asked. 27, almost 28. The math aligned, the timeline fit. Everything Sarah had written, everything Clara had said, it all clicked into place with terrible, beautiful clarity. Your parents, the Dawsons, they died 3 years ago, yellow fever, both of them within a week of each other. Clara's eyes glistened with fresh tears. They were good people, Mr. McCrae. They loved me completely, but they always wanted me to know where I came from, who I came from. And when they were gone, when I had no one left, that need became consuming. So you searched for 3 years, following every lead, every hint. Margaret's family was no help. They'd scattered after her death, wanted nothing to do with the past. But I kept looking. And finally, I found someone who remembered. A nurse from the mission who'd kept records. She had this letter, preserved all these years, waiting for someone to claim it. And you brought it here. I brought it here, Clara confirmed. Because you deserve to know. Because Sarah wanted you to know. And because she trailed off, uncertain. Because why? Clara met his eyes, and in them he saw vulnerability and hope warring with fear. Because I wanted to know you. The man Sarah loved. The man who might have been. She couldn't finish the sentence. Might have been her father. Might have raised her. Might have given her his name and his protection and his love if only Sarah had been brave enough or foolish enough to bring her home. The sun had moved while they talked, shadows lengthening across the porch. Ethan realized they'd been standing here for over an hour, that the world had kept turning while his own had stopped and restarted and reconfigured itself entirely. He stood slowly, his knees protesting, felt every one of his 43 years and then some, but also felt something else, something he hadn't felt in a decade. Purpose, direction, a reason to be something other than a ghost haunting his own life. You must be tired, he said, his voice rough. Thirsty. Hungry. Clara blinked, surprised by the sudden practicality. Yes, all of those things. Come inside. He gestured to the door. Let me get you some water, some food, and we can. He paused, searching for words. We can talk, really talk. There's so much I need to ask, so much I need to understand. You're not sending me away? Hope flickered across Clara's face. Ethan looked at her. At this woman who'd traveled 3 months across dangerous territory carrying a letter from a ghost, seeking a man she'd never met because a promise demanded it. Looked at her and saw courage, saw determination, saw something of Sarah in the set of her shoulders and something of himself in the stubborn lift of her chin. No, he said quietly. I'm not sending you away. How could I? He struggled with the word, with the concept, with the impossible reality. You're part of her, part of what she left behind, and God help me, I'm not strong enough to turn that away. Clara's face crumpled with relief. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Ethan opened the door, and the hinges creaked, a sound he'd heard 10,000 times, but which seemed different now. Significant, like the sound of one chapter ending and another beginning. The inside of the house was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took a moment for his eyes to adjust. Everything was as he'd left it that morning, sparse, clean, organized with the rigid discipline of a man who had nothing but time to keep things in order. The kitchen to the left, the sitting room to the right, the stairs leading up to bedrooms he never used anymore. Clara stepped inside hesitantly, looking around with curious eyes. What did she see? A shrine to the past, a monument to loneliness, a man's desperate attempt to freeze time at the moment before everything fell apart? It's peaceful, she said finally, and he couldn't tell if she was being kind or truthful. It's empty, Ethan corrected. Has been for years. I mostly live in 3 rooms, kitchen, bedroom, and porch. The rest is just space. He moved to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding him through the motions of hospitality. Pumped water into a tin cup, handed it to Clara. Watched her drink like someone who'd been rationing water for too long, who'd learned to be grateful for every drop. When did you last eat? He asked. Yesterday morning. I ran out of supplies 2 days ago, but I was so close I didn't want to stop. Ethan frowned, already reaching for the bread box. You should have stopped. Should have taken care of yourself. I was afraid if I stopped I'd lose my nerve, that I'd turn around and run, and you'd never know. Sarah would never be. Clara's voice wavered. Never be at peace. The bread was a day old but still good. Ethan cut thick slices, added some dried meat from the pantry, a precious spoonful of jam Margaret had sent him last Christmas that he'd been hoarding. He arranged it all on a plate and set it before Clara, who looked at it like it was a feast. Eat, he commanded gently. We can't talk if you faint from hunger. She ate, and he watched her, studied her in the better light of the kitchen, tried to reconcile this flesh-and-blood woman with the baby from Sarah's letter, with the impossible intersection of past and present sitting at his table. The Dawsons, he said finally. Tell me about them. Were they good to you? Clara swallowed, nodded. They were wonderful. Father was a banker. Mother ran the household. They gave me everything. Education, opportunities, love. They never made me feel like I was anything other than their daughter. But they told you the truth. When I was 16, they said I deserved to know, that they didn't want me to find out some other way. Claire's eyes grew distant. Mother cried when she told me, said she was afraid I'd love her less, knowing she wasn't my birth mother. But I loved her more for the honesty, for the trust. Ethan's throat tightened. And your birth mother, Catherine? Did you ever learn anything about her? Just what was in the mission records. Catherine Dawson, age 20, from somewhere in Missouri. No family listed, no history beyond that. She appeared in Santa Fe 6 months before I was born, worked as a seamstress until... Clara gestured helplessly. Until she couldn't anymore. Sarah called her brave, Ethan remembered. She must have been. To face what she faced alone. To fight for my life, even as she was losing her own. Claire's voice wavered. I wish I could have known her. Could have thanked her. I think she knew, Ethan said softly. I think she knew you'd be all right. That's why she asked Sarah to save you. They sat in silence for a moment, two people bound by a woman's choices made in desperation and love. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere outside, a crow called. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. What do we do now? Clara asked finally. I've delivered the letter. You know the truth. I could leave. Head back east, find a new life somewhere and... Is that what you want? Ethan interrupted. Claire looked startled. I don't know what I want. I've spent 3 years focused on finding you, on keeping my promise. I never thought beyond this moment. Ethan stood, moved to the window. Outside, he could see Clara's horse, still standing where she'd left it, patient and waiting. Like the animal knew its rider needed time. Needed this. Sarah asked me to tell you about the ranch, he said, not turning around. About the life we built. The dreams we had. You don't have to. I want to. And he did. Suddenly, desperately. Wanted to speak Sarah's name without pain, to remember her without drowning in grief. She came here 20 years ago. I was just starting out, had nothing but this land and more ambition than sense. She was visiting friends in town, and I saw her at the general store. Clara had finished eating and was listening intently. She was buying fabric, Ethan continued, a small smile tugging at his lips despite everything. Green cotton with little flowers. And she was arguing with the shopkeeper about the price, not backing down even though he was twice her size. I watched her win that argument, get the price she wanted, and walk out with her head high. And I thought, that's a woman who knows her worth. Did you speak to her? Not that day. I was too intimidated, but I started finding reasons to go to town. Lots of reasons. And eventually, she caught on. The smile grew. Called me out on it, actually. Asked me if I was going to keep pretending to need supplies or if I was going to actually talk to her. Clara laughed softly. She sounds bold. She was. Brave and bold and stubborn as hell. Ethan turned from the window. But also kind. So kind it hurt sometimes. She saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. And she loved with everything she had. No holding back, no reservations. When Sarah loved you, you knew it. Felt it in every word, every touch, every look. That's why she couldn't keep me, Clara said quietly. Because she loved me too much to risk me. And why she couldn't tell me, Ethan added. Because she knew I'd love you too. Knew I'd fight for you even when fighting was the wrong choice. They looked at each other across the kitchen, across the years and miles and impossible circumstances that had brought them to this moment. Two people connected by a woman's secret love, by choices made in pain and hope. I don't know what happens now, Ethan admitted. I don't know what Sarah wanted to happen, beyond me knowing the truth, but I do know one thing. What's that? You traveled 3 months to find me, crossed dangerous territory, faced God knows what hardships, carried a piece of Sarah with you all that way. He met Clara's eyes steadily. That means something, has to mean something. And I'm not so far gone in grief that I can't recognize a second chance when it's standing in my kitchen. Clara's eyes widened. A second chance at what? I don't know yet, Ethan said honestly. Maybe nothing more than knowing each other. Maybe something more. But Sarah loved you, held you, chose you. And then she let you go because she thought it was best. Well, now you're here, and you're grown, and you can make your own choices. So I'm asking, what do you want, Clara Dawson? Clara stood, moved toward him slowly. I want to know the man Sarah loved. I want to hear stories about her, about the life she had, about the dreams she dreamed. I want to understand the choices she made. And I want... She paused, vulnerability raw in her voice. I want to not be alone anymore. I want to belong somewhere, to someone, even if it's just for a little while. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, the same thing he'd felt when he'd first held Sarah's letter. Hope, terrible, fragile, impossible hope. You can stay, he said, for as long as you need, for as long as you want. This house has been too empty for too long. I can't promise much, just a roof, food, and stories about a woman we both loved, but it's yours if you want it. Clara's face transformed. The weariness, the uncertainty, the fear, it all melted away, replaced by something that looked like joy, like relief, like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The moment hung between them, heavy with significance and promise, and the weight of all the might-have-beens that Sarah's letter had resurrected. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm Clara had ridden ahead of was finally catching up. Ethan could smell rain on the wind, that particular scent of possibility that comes before a downpour. We should get your horse settled, he said, practical needs reasserting themselves. Storm's coming. Her name is Molly, Clara offered. She's carried me faithfully all this way. Deserves the best care I can give her. Together they went outside. The wind had picked up, whipping Clara's skirts around her legs and tearing strands of hair from her careful pins. The sky had darkened, clouds massing on the western horizon like an advancing army. Ethan led the way to the barn, Clara following with Molly's reins in hand. The barn was the one part of the ranch he'd kept up meticulously. His horses deserved that much, even if everything else had fallen into disrepair. There, he said, pointing to an empty stall. Fresh hay, water in the trough. She'll be comfortable. Clara led Molly inside, began unsaddling her with practiced efficiency. Ethan watched, impressed despite himself. This was a woman who knew horses, who'd spent real time in the saddle, not some city girl playing at adventure. Where'd you learn to ride? He asked. Father insisted, said a woman should be able to take care of herself, horse included. Clara grunted slightly as she lifted the saddle off. Turned out to be the best gift he ever gave me. Don't know how I would have made this journey without those skills. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft and tentative, then harder. Then a deluge, drumming on the barn roof like 1,000 urgent fingers. They stood in the barn doorway, watching the rain transform the dusty ranch into something almost magical. The earth drank it in gratefully, and the air filled with that distinctive scent of rain on drought-parched ground. Sarah loves storms, Ethan said suddenly. Used to stand on the porch just like this watching the rain. Said it reminded her that nothing lasts forever. Not drought, not sorrow, not loneliness. That everything eventually gives way to something else. Was she right? Clara asked. Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd appeared out of nowhere carrying impossible news, who'd cracked open his carefully sealed grief and let the light in. Ask me later, he said. Ask me when we've had time to figure out what this is, what we're doing, what Sarah's letter has set in motion. Clara nodded. Fair enough. They stood there together, stranger and stranger, bound by a shared loss and a shared love, watching the storm wash 10 years of dust from Red Rock Ranch. And for the first time since he'd lowered Sarah's coffin into the ground, Ethan McCrae felt something other than emptiness. He felt possibility. The storm would pass. The sun would return. And whatever came next, conversation or connection or simply the comfort of no longer being alone, he would face it with Sarah's letter pressed against his heart and Clara Dawson at his side. Not a daughter. Not yet. Maybe never. But something. Someone. A living reminder that love doesn't end with death, that choices ripple across years, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the past sends gifts we never knew we needed. The rain poured down, washing everything clean. While inside the barn, two people stood on the edge of a story neither of them had planned but both desperately needed. And somewhere, in whatever realm the dead inhabit, Sarah McCrae smiled. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the barn roof as evening settled over the ranch like a blanket pulled tight. Ethan and Clara remained in the doorway, neither quite ready to break the spell of the moment. The storm had brought a coolness to the air that Colorado hadn't felt in weeks, and with it came a sense of cleansing, as if the sky itself was acknowledging the weight of Sarah's letter and offering its own kind of absolution. "I should show you where you'll sleep," Ethan said finally, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Get you settled before it gets full dark." Clara nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I don't want to be any trouble. If there's a corner somewhere, a spare room—" "There's Sarah's sewing room," Ethan interrupted, then stopped himself. He hadn't spoken those words aloud in years. Sarah's sewing room. As if she might walk through the door any moment and reclaim it. "It has a bed. Was meant to be a nursery, but we never—" He trailed off, the old pain surfacing despite the years of practice at pushing it down. "I understand," Claire said softly. "And I'm grateful for all of this." They made a run for the house through the downpour, their boots splashing in puddles that had formed in the space of minutes. Ethan held the door open, and Clara slipped inside, water streaming from her dress and hair. She looked like a half-drowned cat, bedraggled and shivering, and something about the sight tugged at Ethan's heart in a way he wasn't prepared for. "There are towels in the cupboard," he said, moving toward the stairs. "And I think—" He paused, thinking. "I think some of Sarah's clothes might still fit you. They've been packed away, but if you need something dry—" "I couldn't," Clara protested. "That wouldn't be right." Ethan turned to look at her fully. "She'd want you to be warm, to be comfortable. And they're just sitting in a trunk gathering dust and memories. Might as well serve a purpose." Clara's eyes glistened, though whether from rain or tears, Ethan couldn't tell. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He led her upstairs, his footsteps heavy on the wooden steps he'd climbed alone for a decade. The hallway stretched before them, doors on either side. His bedroom, the guest room that had never hosted a guest, and at the end, the sewing room that had slowly transformed into a storage space for things he couldn't bear to look at but couldn't bring himself to discard. The door creaked when he pushed it open, revealing a small room with a single window overlooking the eastern pasture. The bed was still made. Sarah had insisted on that, keeping it ready for the child she'd hoped would one day need it. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a quilting frame folded against one wall, and everywhere the faint scent of lavender from sachets Sarah had made years ago. "It's perfect," Clara breathed, stepping inside with something like reverence. Ethan moved to the trunk at the foot of the bed, his hands hesitating before lifting the lid. He hadn't opened this in years, hadn't been able to face the tangible reminders of Sarah's presence, her dresses, her shawls, the nightgown she'd worn on cold winter nights when they'd held each other against the darkness. But now, with Clara standing there soaked and shivering, it seemed not just necessary but right. Sarah would have wanted this, would have insisted on it. He pulled out a simple cotton dress, blue with small white flowers. It had been one of Sarah's favorites for everyday wear, practical and comfortable. "This should work," he said, handing it to Clara. And here, he found a shawl, thick wool that Sarah had knitted herself during their second winter together. "This will keep you warm." Clara took the clothes with trembling hands, holding them like they were sacred relics. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For not turning me away, for believing me, for—" "Get changed," Ethan said gruffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get warm. We can talk more over supper." He left her there, closing the door softly behind him, and stood for a moment in the hallway. His heart was racing, his mind spinning with everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. This morning, he'd been alone. Had been alone for 10 years, truth be told, even when he'd had people around him. And now there was someone in his house, someone wearing Sarah's clothes, someone who carried a piece of his wife's love like a torch through the darkness. Downstairs, he busied himself with preparing a meal. It wasn't much: beans from the pot he'd made that morning, some cornbread he could heat up, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Bachelor food, he thought grimly, not the kind of meal you serve to a guest, especially one who'd traveled 3 months to reach your door. But Clara didn't seem to notice or care when she came down 20 minutes later, transformed. Sarah's dress fit her well, a little loose in the waist, a touch short in the hem, but overall as if it had been made for her. Her dark hair was still damp but combed and pinned back, and her face had lost some of its earlier weariness. "You look," Ethan started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. Like Sarah? Like home? Like an answer to a prayer he'd been too broken to pray? "Presentable?" Clara offered with a small smile. "Warm," he settled on. "You look warm." They ate in a silence that was somehow comfortable despite everything that lay unspoken between them. The rain continued outside, a steady percussion that filled the gaps in conversation. Ethan watched Clara eat, noting the way she savored each bite as if food was still a novelty after days of rationing. It reminded him of harder times, of the early years when he and Sarah had scraped by on hope and stubbornness. "Tell me about the journey," he said finally, pushing his empty plate aside. "3 months, you said? From where?" "Boston," Clara replied, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "That's where the Dawsons settled after Santa Fe. Father's bank transferred him when I was 5. I grew up there, never knew anything but city life until—" She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Until I decided to find you. That's a hell of a journey for a woman alone." Clara's chin lifted slightly, a gesture that reminded him so much of Sarah it was almost painful. "I wasn't entirely alone. I traveled with a wagon train as far as Kansas City, worked as a cook to pay my way. From there, I bought Molly and rode with various travelers when I could, alone when I had to." "Dangerous," Ethan observed. "Necessary," Clara corrected. "I had to know. Had to complete the circle somehow. The Dawsons gave me everything, but they couldn't give me this connection to where I came from, to the woman who held me first." Ethan stood, moved to the window. The rain was letting up now, fading to a drizzle that misted the glass. "Sarah wrote in her letter that you deserve to know about me. But I'm just a rancher, Clara. A man who couldn't even keep his wife alive, who let her carry her grief alone because I was too blind to see it." "That's not fair," Clara said firmly. "She didn't give you the chance to help. She made that choice. And I should have seen it anyway. Should have known something was tearing her apart." He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "For months after she came back from Santa Fe, she wasn't herself. Wouldn't meet my eyes, cried in her sleep, pulled away when I tried to hold her. And I told myself it was just grief for her sister's difficult birth, or homesickness, or 100 other things that made sense. But I knew. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, and I let her hide it because it was easier than facing the truth." Clara came to stand beside him, her reflection ghostly in the rain-streaked window. "What truth?" "That I'd failed her somehow. That whatever was hurting her, I couldn't fix it." Ethan's voice cracked. "I was supposed to protect her, keep her safe, make her happy. And instead I watched her die by inches without knowing why." "You couldn't have stopped the fever." "Maybe not. But I could have eased the burden before it came. Could have made her last month something other than silent suffering." He turned to face Clara and was surprised to find tears on her cheeks. "What is it?" "I'm crying for her," Clara said. "For the pain she carried. For the choice she made thinking it was the only one she could make. And I'm crying for you, for the guilt you've carried that was never yours to bear." They stood there in the dim kitchen, 2 people bound by Sarah's ghost, and Ethan felt something shift inside him. A wall he'd built, brick by brick, was beginning to crumble. "Why did you really come here?" he asked quietly. "And don't say it was just to deliver the letter. You could have mailed it, could have hired someone to bring it. Why travel 3 months yourself?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if looking for permission to speak a truth she'd been holding close. "Because I needed to see you," she admitted finally. "Needed to know if the man Sarah loved was worth the sacrifice she made. Needed to understand if her choice, keeping me secret, giving me away, dying with that burden, if any of it made sense." "And does it?" Ethan asked. "Make sense?" "I don't know yet," Clara said honestly. "But I think maybe I'm starting to understand. She loved you enough to protect you from her mistakes. Loved me enough to let me go. And maybe that kind of love, the kind that sacrifices everything, maybe it doesn't have to make sense. Maybe it just has to be real. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm moving east now, taking its fury elsewhere. Ethan found himself thinking of all the storms he'd weathered alone in this house, all the nights he'd sat in darkness listening to rain on the roof and wishing for oblivion. And now, here was Clara, standing in Sarah's dress in Sarah's kitchen, offering him something he'd thought long dead. Understanding, connection, a reason to remember without drowning. Sarah used to say that everything happens for a reason, he said. I never believed her, thought it was just something people said to make sense of senseless things. But now, he gestured helplessly at Clara. Now you're here, and that letter exists, and I don't know what to think anymore. You don't have to think, Clara said. Not tonight. Tonight, we just exist in this moment. Two people who loved the same woman, trying to figure out what that means. Ethan nodded slowly. I can do that, I think. They cleaned up the supper dishes together, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Clara washed, Ethan dried, and the silence between them was companionable now, rather than weighted. Outside, the last of the rain pattered against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the clearing sky. What was she like? Clara asked suddenly. I mean, I know what was in the letter, but what was she really like, day to day, moment to moment? Ethan considered this as he put away the last plate. She was light, he said finally. In a world that's mostly darkness, Sarah was light. She found joy in small things, a perfect sunrise, a horse's nuzzle, bread that rose just right. And she had this laugh. His voice caught. God, her laugh. It started low and built up until she was almost breathless with it. And you couldn't help but laugh with her even if you didn't know what was funny. Clara smiled, wiping her hands on a towel. I wish I could have heard it. She sang too. Couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but that never stopped her. She'd sing while she cooked, while she worked in the garden, while she brushed her hair at night. Drove me crazy sometimes, but now... He swallowed hard. Now I'd give anything to hear her butcher one more hymn. What else? Clara pressed gently. What else should I know? Ethan moved to the sitting room, gesturing for Clara to follow. The room was sparse, a worn sofa, 2 chairs, a fireplace that hadn't seen use in months. But on the mantel sat a single photograph, Sarah's image captured in fading sepia tones. This was taken on our 5th anniversary, Ethan said, taking down the frame with careful hands. She was 30 then, right in the fullness of her life. See her eyes? The photographer said she wouldn't stop smiling, said it was unprofessional for a proper portrait. But that was Sarah. She couldn't be contained by anyone's idea of proper. Clara took the photograph, her fingers trembling slightly. She's beautiful. She was, inside and out. Ethan settled into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. She had this way of seeing people, of looking past all the armor and walls we build and finding the truth underneath. First time we really talked, she told me I was lonely, not in a pitying way, just matter of fact. You're lonely, she said, and you don't have to be. Was she right? She was always right. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. I'd been alone by choice for years before I met her. Told myself I was better off that way, that needing people was a weakness. And then she came along and dismantled every defense I had, not by force, but by just being herself. By being so genuinely, completely present that loneliness became impossible. Clara set the photograph on the small table between them, her eyes never leaving Sarah's captured smile. The letter said she couldn't have children, that it broke her heart. Broke both our hearts, Ethan corrected, but hers more, I think. A woman's worth gets measured different than a man's, and Sarah felt that weight. Felt like she was failing me, failing herself, failing some cosmic expectation she'd internalized without meaning to. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I tried to tell her it didn't matter, that I married her for herself, not for future children, but I don't think she ever really believed me. Is that why she couldn't tell you about me? Clara asked. Because she thought you'd be angry she gave away what you couldn't have together? The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd been circling that same thought since reading the letter, but hearing it spoken aloud gave it a terrible clarity. Maybe, he said roughly, or maybe she thought I'd see it as confirmation of her failure, that she couldn't even make the right choice when given a child to love, that she was as broken at motherhood as she was at conception. But she made the only choice she could make, Clara insisted. Given the circumstances, given the danger, given everything, she chose my safety over her own happiness. I know that now. But did she know it? Or did she die thinking she'd failed at the one thing she wanted most? Ethan stood abruptly, unable to sit still with these thoughts. That's what haunts me, Clara. Not that she kept secrets, not that she made hard choices, but that she might have died thinking she'd disappointed me, that her last thoughts were of failure instead of the love we shared. Clara rose too, crossing to him with determined steps. Then we have to believe differently. Have to believe that in her final moments, she thought of you with love, that she remembered the good years, the laughter, the way you held her, that she died knowing she was loved, even if she couldn't speak the whole truth of her heart. How can you be so sure? Because of the letter? Claire said simply. She wrote it before she got sick, yes, but she wrote it. She didn't have to. She could have taken the secret to her grave and none of us would have known. But she chose to trust that someday, somehow, the truth would set things right. That's not the choice of a woman who died in despair. That's the choice of a woman who believed in love enough to let it work across time and death. Ethan stared at this woman, this stranger who was somehow not a stranger at all, and felt something loosen in his chest. A knot he'd been carrying for 10 years, tied tight with grief and guilt and unanswered questions, was beginning to unravel. You're wise beyond your years, he said. I've had good teachers. The Dawsons taught me to think, to reason, to look for the best in difficult situations. Clara's voice softened. And Sarah, in her own way, taught me about sacrifice, about loving someone enough to let them go. I've been practicing that lesson my whole life without knowing where it came from. They stood in the quiet room, the photograph of Sarah watching them from the table, and Ethan felt time compress in a strange way. Past and present, grief and hope, loss and possibility, all of it existing simultaneously in this single moment. It's late, he said finally. You must be exhausted. I am, Clara admitted. But I'm also, I don't know, awake in a way I haven't been in years, like everything is suddenly clearer, sharper, more real. That's the weightlifting, Ethan said. The weight of not knowing, of searching, of carrying that letter across half the country. It's done now. You fulfilled your promise. And now what? It was the same question she'd asked earlier, and Ethan still didn't have a good answer. Now we figure it out as we go. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, a few days to rest, a few weeks to recover from the journey, or... He paused, not sure he should continue. Or longer, if you want. This house has been empty too long. Could use some life in it again. Clara's eyes widened. You'd let me stay, just like that? Just like that, Ethan confirmed. Sarah wanted you to know me, and I figure the best way to do that is time. Time to talk, to share stories, to let whatever this is between us develop naturally. No pressure, no expectations, just presence. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks again, but she was smiling through them. I'd like that. Very much. Then it's settled. Ethan felt a weight lift from his own shoulders, a decision made that felt right in a way few things had felt right in years. Tomorrow we can talk more, figure out the practicalities. But tonight, you should sleep. God knows you've earned it. Clara nodded, moving toward the stairs. She paused at the bottom, turning back to look at him. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. For reading the letter, for listening, for not sending me away. For giving me a chance to know the man Sarah loved. Thank you for bringing her back to me, Ethan said quietly. In a way, that's what you've done. Given me permission to remember her without drowning in the loss. That's a gift I didn't know I needed. Clara climbed the stairs, her footsteps soft on the wood, and Ethan listened until he heard the door to the sewing room close. Then he stood alone in the sitting room, Sarah's photograph still on the table, and let himself feel the full weight of the day. It had started like any other, sun, dust, loneliness, routine, and now it was ending with a stranger upstairs wearing Sarah's clothes, sleeping in the room meant for a child they'd never had, carrying secrets and connections that rewrote a decade of Ethan's history. He picked up the photograph, studying Sarah's face in the lamplight. What have you done? he whispered to her image. "What kind of impossible gift is this you've sent me?" The photograph, of course, didn't answer, but somewhere deep inside, Ethan felt what he could only describe as Sarah's presence. Not a ghost, not a haunting, but a sense of approval, of rightness. As if she was looking down on this strange reunion she'd orchestrated from beyond the grave, and smiling that smile that never quite fit in a proper portrait. He carried the photograph upstairs with him, returned it to his bedroom where it usually sat on his dresser. The letter from Clara's satchel was there too, where he'd brought it after reading it on the porch. He touched it gently, reverently, then prepared for bed. Sleep should have been impossible after such a day. But as Ethan lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around him and the soft sounds of another person breathing in a nearby room, he felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. Peace. Not the peace of resolution or the peace of forgetting, but the peace of finally having a path forward. A reason to wake up tomorrow that went beyond mere habit. Someone to talk to who understood loss from the inside out. A connection to Sarah that was living and breathing instead of frozen in memory. He drifted off thinking of Clara's face when she'd first seen Sarah's photograph, the wonder and recognition there. Thinking of the way Sarah's dress had fit her as if designed for her. Thinking of the impossible chain of choices and chances that had led from a dying woman in a Santa Fe hospital to a stranger on his porch carrying a letter written in a ghost's hand. Somewhere in that tangle of thoughts and memories, exhaustion claimed him, and he slept more soundly than he had in years. He woke to the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, caught between sleep and waking, Ethan thought he was 20 years in the past. Thought Sarah was downstairs, humming tunelessly as she always did while making breakfast. His heart leapt with joy before reality crashed back in, and he remembered. Sarah was dead, had been dead for 10 years, but Clara was here. He dressed quickly, splashed water on his face from the basin, and made his way downstairs. The morning sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in gold, and there in the kitchen stood Clara, moving around with surprising familiarity as she prepared breakfast. "Morning," she said, looking up with a smile. "Hope you don't mind. I found the coffee and the eggs, and I thought, well, it's the least I could do after your hospitality." Ethan stood in the doorway, caught by the strangeness and rightness of the scene. A woman in his kitchen again after all these years. Not Sarah, could never be Sarah, but someone. Something. "I don't mind," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Smells good." They ate together as the sun climbed higher, talking of small things, the quality of the eggs, the strength of the coffee, the way the storm had cleared the air. Safe topics, comfortable topics, nothing that touched on the emotional earthquake of the previous day. But after breakfast, as they cleared the dishes, Clara turned to him with determination in her eyes. "Show me the ranch," she said. "Show me the places Sarah loved, the work you do, the life you've built. I want to understand it all." Ethan hesitated only a moment before nodding. "All right, but it's not much to see, just a working ranch, and not working as well as it used to." "It's your life," Clara said firmly. "Sarah's life. That makes it worth seeing." So he showed her. Walked her through the barn where 3 horses stood in their stalls, past the paddock where he used to train the horses he sold before grief made him lose interest in the business. Pointed out the fields where corn used to grow tall and green, now lying fallow because one man couldn't manage it all alone. And finally, inevitably, he led her to the old oak tree behind the house. Sarah's grave was simple. A wooden cross Ethan had carved himself, her name and dates etched deep into the wood. The earth was sunken slightly now, after 10 years, and wildflowers had grown up around the edges. Sarah would have liked that, he thought, would have preferred the wild beauty to any formal garden. Clara stood before the grave in silence, her hand pressed to her mouth. Ethan gave her space, standing back beneath the oak's spreading branches, letting her have this moment. "I'm sorry," Clara said finally, and Ethan wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to Sarah. "I'm sorry you had to make such impossible choices. I'm sorry you carried such weight alone. And I'm sorry I never got to thank you for giving me life, for loving me enough to let me go, for being brave when it must have felt like your heart was breaking." She knelt then, placing her hand on the grave. "But I want you to know, I had a good life. The Dawsons loved me completely. They gave me everything you hoped I'd have. Safety, security, love, education, a chance to become who I was meant to be. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain, Sarah. It wasn't. Ethan felt his own eyes burning with tears. He'd stood at this grave 1,000 times, spoken to Sarah in his mind countless times, but he'd never heard anyone else speak to her, never heard her acknowledged by another living soul who knew her story. Clara stood, turning to face him with tears streaming down her face. "She's at peace," she said with surprising certainty. "I can feel it. She's at peace now that the truth is out." "How can you know that?" "I just do." Clara wiped her eyes. "The same way I knew I had to find you. The same way I knew that letter was real, even when logic said it was impossible. Some things you just know in your bones." They stood together beneath the oak, and Ethan found himself reaching for Clara's hand. She took it without hesitation, and they stood like that. Two people joined by grief and love and the ghost of a woman who'd orchestrated this meeting from beyond death itself. "What do we do now?" Clara asked again, and this time Ethan had an answer. "We live," he said simply. "We honor her by living, by finding joy in small things the way she did, by being present for each other the way she taught us to be, by building something new from the pieces of what was lost." Clara squeezed his hand. "I'd like that." "So would I." They turned from the grave together, walking back toward the house. The morning was bright, the air clear after the storm, and possibilities stretched out before them like an unwritten page. Neither of them knew what would come next, whether Clara would stay or go, whether the connection between them would deepen or fade, whether Sarah's letter had given them a new beginning or just a moment of closure before they returned to their separate lives. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to walk side by side, to know they weren't alone in their grief or their love for Sarah, to understand that sometimes the past reaches forward to offer unexpected gifts, and the only choice is whether to accept them. Ethan had spent 10 years refusing those gifts, locked in his grief like a man in a prison of his own making. But Clara had brought him a key in the form of a letter, and he'd finally found the courage to use it. The house rose before them, familiar and strange all at once. Still the same structure, still the same walls, but somehow transformed by the simple act of sharing it with another person. Ethan could almost hear Sarah's voice on the wind, that laugh that started low and built until it was breathless, could almost see her standing on the porch with her arms open wide. "Welcome," she seemed to say, "welcome to whatever comes next." And for the first time in 10 years, Ethan McCrae felt ready to walk through that door and find out. The days that followed took on a rhythm neither Ethan nor Clara had anticipated. She didn't leave after a few days of rest, as he'd half expected, and he didn't ask her to. Instead, they fell into a pattern of coexistence that felt both strange and natural. Two people learning to orbit each other in the space Sarah's letter had created. Clara proved herself useful in ways that surprised him. She could mend fence as well as any ranch hand, had a gentle touch with the horses that reminded him painfully of Sarah, and possessed a practical knowledge of ranch work that spoke of more than just city breeding. When he mentioned this one afternoon as they worked together repairing a section of the barn wall, she'd smiled. "The Dawsons had a summer house in the countryside," she explained, holding a board steady while Ethan hammered. "Father believed in honest work, said it built character. So every summer from age 12, I spent mornings helping the caretaker with whatever needed doing. Mucking stalls, mending fences, feeding livestock. Mother thought it was beneath me, but Father insisted." "Smart man," Ethan said, driving in another nail. He was. They both were, in their own ways. Clara's voice went soft. "I miss them. Even after 3 years, I still turn to tell them something and find them gone all over again." Ethan understood that particular ache too well. "Does it get easier?" "I don't know. Does it?" He set down the hammer, considering. "Different, maybe. Not easier, just different. The sharp edges dull over time, but the shape of the loss stays the same. You just get better at carrying it." Clara nodded, running her hand along the new board. "Sarah's been gone 10 years, and you still carry her. Will I still be carrying the Dawsons in 10 years? Probably. If you love them, they stay with you, become part of who you are." Ethan picked up another nail. "Doesn't mean you can't love other people, build a new life. Just means they're woven into the fabric of you. Can't separate them out without unraveling the whole thing. They worked in silence after that, but it was a companionable quiet. The kind that comes when two people understand each other's grief without needing to speak it aloud. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the western ridge, Clara broke the silence with a question that had clearly been building. What happened to Sarah's sister? Margaret, from the letter, is she still in Santa Fe? Ethan shook his head. Died about 5 years ago. Influenza. Her husband wrote to tell me, asked if I wanted any of her possessions. I said no. He paused, remembering. I was angry at her then. Angry that she'd kept Sarah's secret. Angry that she'd known about you and never told me. Seemed like the whole world had conspired to keep me in the dark. But you understand now why she did it? Understanding and forgiving aren't the same thing, Ethan said. I understand she was honoring Sarah's wishes. Doesn't mean I'm not still angry about it sometimes. Clara drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. I was angry too when I first learned the truth. Angry at everyone. At Sarah for giving me away. At the Dawsons for not telling me sooner. At my birth mother for dying. At God for making everything so complicated. Spent a year just being furious at the unfairness of it all. What changed? I realized anger was just grief wearing a different face. That being mad at dead people for choices they made in impossible situations was just my way of avoiding the real pain underneath. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the dying light. What's your real pain, Ethan? Under the anger, under the guilt, what is it you're really grieving? No one had asked him that before. Not in 10 years of neighbors offering sympathy, of well-meaning friends suggesting he move on, of his own late-night wrestling with ghosts and memories. Clara's question cut through all of it to the raw center he'd been protecting. The future, he said finally. I'm grieving the future we should have had. Not just Sarah and me, but... He gestured helplessly. Everything. Children we never had, grandchildren we'll never know. A life that should have stretched out for decades but got cut short at 15 years. Every day that passes is another day stolen from what should have been. That's a heavy weight to carry, Clara said softly. It's the only weight I have left of her. Let it go, and what's left? Just memories and a grave under an oak tree. Clara was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan worried he'd said too much, revealed too much of the darkness that still lived in his heart despite the light she'd brought. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle rather than judgmental. What if the weight you're carrying isn't Sarah at all? What if it's your own unlived life, your own abandoned future, and you've just draped it in her memory because that's easier than admitting you're grieving for yourself? The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan stood abruptly, gripping the porch railing. I'm not saying you didn't love her, Claire continued, standing to face him. I'm saying maybe you've loved her so hard and so long that you've forgotten you're allowed to have a life beyond that love, beyond that loss. She was my life, Ethan said through gritted teeth. She was part of your life, a huge part, the best part, maybe, but not all of it. There's still you, Ethan, still a man with years ahead of him, with work to do and sunsets to see, and she stopped, seeming to struggle for words, and people to know, connections to make, purposes to find. Like what? Like you? The words came out harsher than he intended, edged with a defensiveness born of fear. Is that what this is about? You want me to replace Sarah with some relationship with you, the daughter she gave away coming back to play house with the husband she left behind? Clara flinched as if he'd struck her. No, that's not what I meant at all. Then what did you mean? Ethan demanded. Because it sounds like you're telling me to just forget her, move on, pretend the last 10 years of grief were just me being stubborn. I'm telling you to live. Clara's voice rose to match his. I'm telling you that honoring Sarah's memory doesn't mean embalming yourself in the past. That maybe, just maybe, she'd want you to find joy again, purpose again, connection again, even if it scares you, especially if it scares you. They stood facing each other in the twilight, both breathing hard, the air between them charged with emotion too complex to name. Anger, yes, but also fear and hope, and the terrible vulnerability of being truly seen. I don't know how, Ethan said finally, his voice breaking. I don't know how to do any of that. Don't know how to be anything other than a man grieving his wife. Clara's expression softened. She took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was close enough to touch him, but didn't. Then maybe we figure it out together, both of us. Two people who loved Sarah, trying to find a way to live with her memory instead of being buried by it. And if I can't, if I'm too broken, too far gone, then I'll be patient. I've waited 27 years to understand where I came from. I can wait a while longer to help you remember where you're going. Something in Ethan's chest cracked open at that. Spring, solid one moment and flowing the next. He found himself reaching for Clara's hand, holding it like a lifeline. I'm afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if I let go of the grief, I'll lose her completely. That she'll fade away like morning fog and I'll be left with nothing. She won't fade, Clara promised. I'm here. I'm proof she existed, proof she loved, proof her choices mattered. As long as I'm here, Sarah lives in the story of what she did, who she was, what she sacrificed. You can't lose that. Can't lose her. Not really. Ethan pulled Clara into an embrace then, sudden and fierce, and she wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. They stood like that on the porch as darkness fell, two people clinging to each other against the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Thank you, he whispered into her hair, for coming here, for being stubborn enough to find me, for not letting me rot in my own grief. Thank you for letting me stay, Clara whispered back, for giving me a place to belong when I didn't even know I was looking for one. They pulled apart slowly, both wiping at their eyes, both smiling despite the tears. The evening star was bright on the horizon, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled at the rising moon. I should start supper, Ethan said, his voice rough but lighter somehow. I'll help. They moved into the house together, and as Ethan lit the lamps, he caught sight of Sarah's photograph on the mantel. For the first time in years, looking at it didn't bring a crushing weight of loss. Instead, he felt something almost like gratitude. Thank you, he thought toward her image. Thank you for knowing I'd need this. Thank you for sending her. The weeks that followed brought a subtle shift in the household. Clara had been there nearly a month now, and the initial strangeness had worn away to reveal something deeper, more substantial. They worked the ranch together, shared meals, spent evenings on the porch talking about everything and nothing. And slowly, carefully, Ethan began to share more stories about Sarah. Not the grief stories, the ones that ended in loss and regret, but the real stories. The living ones. The time Sarah had tried to bake bread and accidentally used salt instead of sugar, creating something so inedible even the chickens wouldn't touch it. The way she'd insisted on naming every single chicken, giving them elaborate backstories and personalities. The afternoon she'd convinced Ethan to dance with her in the rain, both of them soaked and laughing like children. She sounds wonderful, Clara said one evening after a particularly good story about Sarah's failed attempt to learn to rope cattle. She was, Ethan agreed. Stubborn, impractical sometimes, but wonderful. Made the ordinary feel magical somehow. Made me feel like I was more than just a rancher scraping by. Made me feel like I mattered. You did matter. To her, you still matter. Ethan looked at Clara, really looked at her in the lamplight. She'd been there long enough now that seeing her in Sarah's dresses no longer felt jarring. Long enough that her presence had become not just accepted, but expected. Long enough that the house felt wrong when she went into town for supplies, and he was alone again. You matter too, he said quietly. I want you to know that. Whatever this is we're building here, friendship, family, I don't know what to call it, but you matter to me, Clara, not just because of Sarah, but because of who you are. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears. That means more than you know. I've spent my whole life feeling like I was standing on the outside of my own story, watching someone else's narrative unfold. But here, with you, I feel like I'm finally writing my own chapter. What does that chapter say? I don't know yet, but I'm not afraid to find out anymore. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. Ethan stood, immediately alert. Visitors were rare at Red Rock Ranch, especially after dark. He moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to see 3 riders coming up the path. You expecting anyone? Clara asked, joining him at the window. No. Ethan's hand went instinctively to where his gun used to hang. Stay inside. Could be nothing, but I'm not hiding, Clara said firmly. If there's trouble, we face it together. The riders pulled up in front of the house, and Ethan recognized the lead horse immediately. It belonged to Tom Brennan, his nearest neighbor 5 miles east. Tom was a decent man, solid and reliable, but the grim set of his face in the lamplight spoke of serious business. Ethan stepped onto the porch, Clara close behind him. Tom wasn't expecting company. Tom dismounted and his companions did the same. Ethan recognized them too, Sam Walker and Joe Chen, both from town. Good men, both of them, but their presence together spelled trouble. Ethan, Tom said, climbing the porch steps. His eyes flicked to Clara with obvious curiosity, but he was too polite to ask directly. Sorry to come by so late, but we've got a situation. Thought you should know. What kind of situation? Tom glanced at his companions, then back to Ethan. Rustlers. Hit the Morrison place last night, got away with near 20 head of cattle. Sheriff tracked them heading this direction, thinks they might be holing up somewhere in the hills between your spread and mine. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Rustlers were rare these days, but when they did strike, they were dangerous, desperate men with nothing to lose. Sheriff want to organize a search party? That's why we're here. He's gathering men, plans to ride out at first light. Wants every able-bodied man he can get, especially those who know the terrain. Tom's eyes went to Clara again, this time with concern. You might want to send your... He hesitated, clearly unsure what to call Clara. Send the lady to town until this is settled. Ain't safe out here alone if those men are still prowling. I'm not going to town, Clara said before Ethan could respond. This is my home now. I stay. Tom looked to Ethan for confirmation, eyebrows raised. Ethan could see the questions forming. Who was this woman? Why was she at the ranch? What was their relationship? But Tom was too much of a gentleman to voice them. She stays, Ethan confirmed. But I'll ride with the search party come morning. Ethan, no, Clara protested. If there are dangerous men out there, all the more reason to help catch them, Ethan interrupted. Can't let rustlers think they can operate freely in these parts. Bad for everyone. Tom nodded approvingly. Sheriff will be glad to have you. You know these hills better than most. We're meeting at the Morrison place at dawn. I'll be there. After Tom and his companions left, Clara turned on Ethan with fire in her eyes. You can't go chasing after criminals. What if something happens to you? What if I do nothing and they hurt someone else? Steal from another family? Maybe hurt someone who can't defend themselves? Ethan met her gaze steadily. I've been hiding from life for 10 years, Clara. You said it yourself. I need to engage with the world again. Well, this is part of that world. Responsibility, community, standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Isn't it? Ethan challenged. You want me to live again, to be part of something bigger than my own grief. This is what that looks like. It's not always comfortable or safe or easy. Clara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. I just found you. I can't lose you now. Can't lose another person She stopped abruptly, as if shocked by what she'd almost said. The unfinished sentence hung between them, heavy with implication. Ethan took a step closer. Another person you what, Clara? She looked away, color rising in her cheeks. Another person I care about. Is that so wrong? To not want you to ride into danger when I've barely gotten to know you? Ethan's heart did something complicated in his chest. It's not wrong, but I have to go. You know I do. Clara was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was small. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back. I promise to do my best on both counts. That's not the same thing. It's the only thing I can promise honestly. Ethan reached out, tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. But I will try. For you, I'll try. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither quite dared to name. Then Clara pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. I'll have coffee ready before you go, and food for the ride. Thank you. They didn't speak much more that evening. Both retired early, though Ethan suspected neither of them slept well. He certainly didn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's face, the fear in her eyes, the words she'd almost spoken. Another person what? Care about, love, need? He couldn't finish the thought. Couldn't let himself go there, not yet. The guilt felt too heavy, the betrayal of Sarah's memory too sharp. But underneath the guilt was something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. True to her word, Clara had coffee and food ready when Ethan came downstairs in the pre-dawn darkness. She moved around the kitchen silently, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "You didn't sleep," Ethan observed. "Neither did you. I heard you pacing." He couldn't deny it, so he just accepted the coffee she handed him, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "Clara, about last night." "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't say anything you don't mean, and don't make this harder than it already is. Just go do what you have to do and come back safe. We'll talk about everything else when this is over." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to clear the air between them, but she was right. Now wasn't the time. So he just nodded, drank his coffee, and gathered his supplies. At the door, he paused. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway, backlit by lamplight, looking small and afraid, and trying desperately not to show it. On impulse, Ethan crossed back to her and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I'll come back," he said into her hair. "I promise I'll come back." Clara held him fiercely. "You better. Because we have unfinished business, you and I. Stories to share, life to live, and—" her voice caught. "And I'm not ready to say goodbye. Not to you. Not yet." Ethan pulled back just enough to look at her face. In the dim light, she looked so much like Sarah it hurt. Not in features, but in the fierce love shining in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she cared so deeply it seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fire. Without thinking, without planning, he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'll come back," he repeated. Then, before he could second-guess himself or see her reaction, he turned and walked out into the darkness. The ride to Morrison's place took an hour through terrain Ethan could navigate blindfolded. He'd ridden these paths 1,000 times, in sun and rain and snow, and they were etched into his muscle memory. But this morning, his mind wasn't on the familiar landscape. It was on Clara, on that almost confession, on the feel of her in his arms and the terror in her eyes at the thought of losing him. When had it happened? When had she become more than just the messenger who'd delivered Sarah's letter? More than the baby his wife had loved and lost? When had Clara Dawson, in her own right, become someone who mattered to him? He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, and just wasn't ready to face it. The Morrison place was lit up like Christmas when he arrived. Men and horses gathered in the yard. Ethan recognized most of them, neighbors, ranchers, a few townsmen who'd volunteered. Sheriff Wade stood in the center, organizing everyone into search parties. "McCrae," the sheriff called out when he spotted Ethan. "Glad you could make it. I want you with the group heading into the northern hills. You know that territory better than anyone." Ethan dismounted, tying his horse with the others. "What are we dealing with, Sheriff?" "How many men?" "Tracks suggest 3, maybe 4. Armed, definitely dangerous. They hit the Morrison place hard, pistol-whipped young Billy when he tried to stop them, made off with the cattle like they'd planned the whole thing." Wade's weathered face was grim. "These aren't opportunistic thieves. They're organized, probably ex-soldiers who turned bad. Makes them more dangerous. Rules of engagement? Capture if possible, but don't take unnecessary risks. If they resist, you're authorized to use whatever force is necessary to protect yourself and others." Wade looked around at the assembled men. "I don't want any heroes, understand? These men are desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. Stay smart, stay together, and stay alive." The men nodded their understanding, and Wade began dividing them into groups. Ethan found himself partnered with Tom Brennan, Sam Walker, and a quiet tracker named Running Bear, who could read signs most men would miss. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the search parties headed out in different directions. Ethan's group took the northern route, climbing into the rocky hills where a dozen caves and hidden valleys could conceal men and stolen cattle. They rode in silence, eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of disturbance. Running Bear was in the lead, occasionally dismounting to examine tracks or broken branches. 2 hours in, he held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "Horses," he said quietly, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth. 4 riders, heavily loaded, heading east into the canyon. "That's the Box Canyon," Tom said. "Dead end. If they went in there, they're trapped." "Or they know it and are waiting to ambush anyone who follows," Sam countered. Ethan studied the terrain ahead. Box Canyon was aptly named. Steep walls on 3 sides, only one way in or out. A perfect defensive position if you got there first, but a death trap if someone blocked your exit. We need to approach carefully, he said. Running Bear, can you get up on the ridge, give us a view from above? The tracker nodded, already moving toward a narrow trail that led up the canyon wall. Give me 10 minutes. They waited, tension mounting as the sun climbed higher. Ethan found his thoughts drifting back to the ranch, to Clara waiting for him to return. Had he been a fool to promise her he'd come back? Out here, with armed criminals and uncertain odds, promises felt like dangerous things. But he'd made it, and he meant to keep it. For Sarah's memory, yes, but also for Clara herself. For the life they were tentatively building together, whatever that life might become. Running Bear appeared on the ridge, signaling down. 4 men, he indicated with hand signs. Cattle penned, 1 guard posted. 1 guard means they're confident, Tom muttered. Think they're safe up here. Or they're running low on manpower, Ethan suggested. Could be injured, could be fewer than we thought. Either way, we have an advantage. Surprise. They planned quickly. Tom and Sam would create a distraction at the canyon mouth, while Ethan and Running Bear came in from above, using a narrow ledge Ethan remembered from his younger days exploring these hills. It was risky. 1 wrong step could mean a fatal fall, but it would put them in position to cut off any escape. The plan went smoothly at first. Tom and Sam made noise, drawing the guards' attention and 2 others who emerged from a crude camp. Running Bear and Ethan picked their way along the ledge, high above the canyon floor, until they had a clear view of the entire scene. 4 men, as Running Bear had said. 3 by the camp, 1 still in the rocks, probably watching the cattle. They looked hard-worn, faces shadowed with desperation and defiance. Ex-soldiers, Ethan guessed, judging by the military precision of their camp. Men who'd fought in one war or another and couldn't find their way back to peace. Ethan felt a strange kinship with them, these broken men living in the margins. Wasn't he just as lost, just as damaged by his own battles with grief and isolation? The only difference was they'd turned to crime while he'd turned inward. But unlike them, he'd been given a chance at redemption. Clara had brought him that chance wrapped in Sarah's letter. He wasn't going to waste it. On my signal, he whispered to Running Bear. They had their rifles ready, positioned to cover the camp from above. Below, Tom and Sam were negotiating, calling for the rustlers to surrender. It could have ended peacefully, should have ended peacefully. But one of the rustlers, young, no more than 20, panicked. He drew his gun and fired wildly toward Tom's voice. Everything happened in seconds. Tom dove for cover. Sam returned fire. The rustlers scattered. And Ethan, acting on pure instinct, fired a warning shot that ricocheted off the rocks above their heads. "Drop your weapons," he shouted from the ledge. "You're surrounded. No way out." For a moment it looked like they'd comply. 3 of them froze, hands moving toward their gun belts. But the 4th, the youngest, raised his pistol toward where he thought Ethan's voice had come from. Running Bear fired first, a clean shot that hit the young man's gun hand, sending the pistol flying. The kid screamed and went down, clutching his wounded hand. The others, seeing their companion shot and realizing they were outmaneuvered, finally raised their hands in surrender. The arrest went quickly after that. Sam and Tom secured the prisoners while Ethan and Running Bear made their way down from the ledge. The wounded rustler was young, barely more than a boy, his face white with pain and fear. "I didn't want to shoot," he kept saying. "I didn't want to, but we needed the money, needed to eat, needed—" "Hush now," Ethan said, binding the kid's wounded hand with surprising gentleness. "It's over. Done. You made bad choices, but you're alive. That counts for something." The kid looked at him with eyes that held too much suffering for someone so young. "What happens now?" "Now you face the law, do your time, and when you get out you make better choices. You hear me? You survive this and you do better." It was advice Ethan wished someone had given him 10 years ago. Survive and do better. Don't let the past swallow you whole. The ride back to Morrison's place took most of the day. The cattle were recovered, the rustlers were in custody, and no one was seriously hurt except for the young man's wounded hand. A good outcome, all things considered. But Ethan felt bone-tired in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. He'd been running on adrenaline and purpose all day. But now, with the danger past, all he wanted was to get home to Clara. Home to Clara. When had he started thinking of it that way? Sheriff Wade thanked them all personally, shaking hands and promising to see justice done. You did good work today, men. Real good work. Community's safer for it. As Ethan prepared to ride out, Tom caught his arm. That woman at your place, he said quietly. She's someone special? Ethan met his neighbor's eyes. Tom was asking out of concern, not gossip. She is, Ethan admitted. It's complicated, but yes, she's special. Good, Tom said simply. Been worried about you these past years, Ethan. Man wasn't meant to live alone like you've been doing. Glad you found some company, however it came about. The sun was setting by the time Ethan reached the ranch. The house glowed with lamplight in the gathering dusk, and on the porch, he could see a figure waiting. Clara. She must have been watching for him all day. She ran down the steps as he dismounted, and he barely had time to steady himself before she threw herself into his arms. You're back, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. You're really back. You kept your promise. Ethan held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. Told you I would. She pulled back to look at him, her hands framing his face as if to verify he was whole and unhurt. I was so scared. All day I kept imagining... She shook her head. It doesn't matter. You're here. You're safe. I'm here, he confirmed. And Clara, we need to talk. About last night. About what you said. Not now, she interrupted, but she was smiling through her tears. Now you need food and rest. Tomorrow we talk. Tomorrow we figure out what this is between us. But tonight, just let me be grateful you came home. Home. There was that word again. Ethan realized with startling clarity that this place, which had felt like a tomb for 10 years, had become home again. Not because of the building or the land, but because of the woman in his arms. Because of Clara, who'd traveled across half a continent carrying a letter from a ghost, seeking a man she'd never met, hoping to understand a sacrifice made before she could remember. Clara, who'd somehow become essential to his life in the span of a few short weeks. They walked into the house together, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Something that felt like peace, like purpose, like the future he'd thought was buried with Sarah might still be waiting ahead of him after all. That night, Ethan slept better than he had in months, perhaps years. When he woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window, he lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house. Clara was already up. He could hear her moving around downstairs, the familiar creak of floorboards, the soft clatter of dishes. Normal sounds. Living sounds. The house had been silent for so long that these everyday noises felt like music. He dressed slowly, his body protesting yesterday's exertion. At 43, he wasn't as resilient as he'd once been. The ride, the tension, the scramble down the canyon ledge, all of it had taken a toll. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from purpose, from action, from mattering in the world again. When he came downstairs, Clara was at the stove, her back to him. She wore one of Sarah's simpler dresses, pale yellow with tiny flowers, and her dark hair was braided down her back. For just a moment, Ethan's heart lurched, seeing Sarah in the angle of her shoulders, the tilt of her head. But then Clara turned, and she was herself, younger, different, uniquely her own person. Morning, she said, and her smile was tentative, uncertain. I made breakfast. Thought you'd be hungry after yesterday. Starving, Ethan admitted, moving to the table. The spread she'd prepared was impressive. Eggs, bacon, fresh biscuits, even jam. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. I wanted to. Clara brought him coffee, her fingers brushing his as she set down the cup. The contact sent a jolt through him, and from the way her breath caught, she felt it too. Besides, gave me something to do besides worry. They ate in a silence that was comfortable on the surface but hummed with unspoken things underneath. The conversation from 2 nights ago hung between them like morning mist, visible, tangible, but too delicate to grab hold of directly. Finally, Ethan set down his fork. We should talk. I know. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. I've been thinking about what I said, about not wanting to lose another person She paused, gathering courage. Another person I care about. Clara, please let me finish, son. She looked at him directly, her dark eyes fierce with determination. I came here to deliver a letter, to fulfill a promise, to understand where I came from, but somewhere along the way, it became about more than that. It became about you, about knowing you, understanding you, about, her voice dropped to barely a whisper, about not wanting to leave. Ethan's throat tightened. You're welcome to stay as long as you want. I've said that. But for how long? A few more weeks, months, until the novelty wears off and you realize I'm just a reminder of everything you lost? Clara stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I need to know what this is, Ethan. What we are to each other. Because I can't keep living in this limbo, not knowing if I'm a guest or something more. What do you want to be? Ethan asked quietly. Clara turned to face him, and tears glistened in her eyes. I want to matter to you, not as Sarah's legacy or the baby she couldn't keep or some symbol of her love, but as myself, as Clara. I want to matter as me. You do, Ethan said, standing to close the distance between them. God help me, you do matter. More than I expected, more than I was ready for. These past weeks, having you here, it's woken something in me I thought was dead. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. Or just the simple human need to connect with someone. But is it me you're connecting with? Or is it Sarah's ghost? The question was fair, and Ethan knew it deserved an honest answer. He thought about it, really examined his feelings with the kind of brutal honesty he'd been avoiding. At first, he admitted, maybe it was about Sarah. About the connection to her, the chance to know someone she'd loved. But now, he reached out, took Clara's hand. Now, when I think about you leaving, when I imagine this house without you in it, the emptiness I feel isn't about Sarah. It's about you, about losing your presence, your voice, your laugh, about going back to being alone when I've just remembered what it's like to share my life with someone. Clara's breath hitched. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know exactly what this is between us, but I know it's real. I know it matters. And I know I want you to stay, not as a guest or a reminder of the past, but as, he struggled for the right word, as family, maybe, or friendship, or whatever this grows into if we give it the chance. Family, Clara repeated, and something flickered across her face, hurt perhaps or disappointment. Is that all? Ethan's heart was racing now, his carefully constructed defenses crumbling. No, he said roughly. No, that's not all. But Clara, I'm scared. Scared of dishonoring Sarah's memory. Scared of my own feelings. Scared of what it means to care about someone again when the last person I cared about died in my arms. I'm scared too, Clara whispered. Scared that what I'm feeling is wrong, that I'm trying to replace the Dawsons or create some fantasy of what Sarah and you could have been together. Scared that I'm alone in this, whatever this is. You're not alone. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. I feel it too. This pull, this connection, it's terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected, and I don't know what to do about it. Clara reached up, her hand trembling as she touched his face. Maybe we don't have to know. Maybe we just take it one day at a time. Let it be whatever it wants to be without forcing it or defining it or worrying about whether it's right or wrong. That's a dangerous way to live, Ethan said, but he was leaning into her touch despite himself. So is the alternative. So is pushing away everyone and everything because you're afraid of loss. Clara's thumb brushed across his cheekbone. Sarah's letter gave me permission to find you. Now I'm asking for permission to stay. To see where this goes, to build something new instead of just preserving something old. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision, the enormity of what she was asking. To let go of his carefully maintained grief, to open himself to possibility again, to risk his heart after 10 years of keeping it locked away. When he opened his eyes, Clara was watching him with such hope and fear mingled together that something in him broke. Or maybe healed. He wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Stay, he said. Please stay. Clara's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Are you sure? No, Ethan admitted. I'm not sure of anything except that I want you here. That waking up knowing you're in this house, working alongside you, talking with you in the evenings, it's given me something I thought I'd lost forever, a reason to look forward instead of back. What about Sarah? What about... Sarah wanted me to know you, Ethan interrupted gently. She wrote that in her letter. She wanted me to tell you about our life, to share our story with you, Maybe she knew. Maybe somehow she knew that you were what I'd need when the grief finally loosened its grip. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You really believe that? I want to believe it. Want to believe that Sarah loved us both enough to engineer this meeting from beyond the grave. That everything, her choices, your search, that letter, all of it was leading to this moment right here. They stood in the kitchen, hands clasped, tears on both their faces, and Ethan felt the last of his resistance crumble. He pulled Clara into his arms, and she came willingly, fitting against him like she'd been made to occupy that exact space. I'm still going to be difficult, he warned her. Still going to have days when the grief comes back hard. Still going to struggle with guilt and doubt and all the mess that comes with trying to move forward. I know, Clara murmured against his chest. And I'm still going to have questions about where I fit, who I am to you, whether this is real or just two lonely people finding comfort in each other. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we work through it together. Together, Ethan repeated, and the word felt like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something he wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the morning light, while outside the ranch woke up around them. Horses whinnied in the pasture, birds sang in the oak tree where Sarah rested, and the world turned on its axis, indifferent to the small miracle happening in this kitchen. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. Clara laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. What do we do now? Now? Ethan wiped his eyes, feeling lighter than he had in years. Now we live. We work the ranch, we share meals, we figure out this thing between us one day at a time, and we see what happens. That simple? That complicated, Ethan corrected with a rueful smile. But we do it together, so maybe it's manageable. The days that followed took on a different quality. The work was the same. Fences to mend, horses to tend, endless ranch tasks that never truly ended. But now there was an ease between Ethan and Clara, an acknowledgement of something deeper than friendship, but not yet defined beyond that. They talked more, shared more. Clara told him about her childhood in Boston, about the Dawsons and their kindness, about the moment she'd learned the truth of her origins and how it had shaken her understanding of herself. Ethan shared stories of his own youth, of the early days with Sarah, of dreams they'd had and plans they'd made. We wanted to expand the ranch, he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Sarah had this vision of breeding horses, creating a line known throughout Colorado. Said we'd call them the Red Rock Line, and people would travel from Denver just to see them. Why didn't you? Life got in the way, money was tight, then Sarah got sick, then... He gestured helplessly. Then it was just me. And the dream felt too big for one person to carry. Clara was quiet for a moment. What if it wasn't just you anymore? Ethan turned to look at her. What are you suggesting? I'm saying maybe that dream doesn't have to stay buried with Sarah. Maybe it could be something we build together. Your knowledge, well, I don't have much, but I can learn. And I have some money from the Dawsons' estate. Not a fortune, but enough to invest in good breeding stock. The idea sent a thrill through Ethan that he hadn't felt in years. You'd do that? Invest in this place, in a dream that wasn't even yours? It could be mine, Clara said, if you'll let it be. If you'll let me be part of this ranch's future instead of just its present. Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I'd like that. Sarah would have liked it too. She always said dreams were meant to be shared, not hoarded. Then let's share it. Let's build something together. They spent the next weeks planning. Clara proved to have a head for business that surprised Ethan. She could calculate costs and profits with an ease that spoke of good education and natural aptitude. Together they researched breeding programs, corresponded with horse traders, and began to envision what Red Rock Ranch could become. But it wasn't all work and planning. There were moments of simple pleasure too. Evening rides across the property, Clara's laughter echoing across the hills when her horse spooked at a rabbit. Quiet mornings sharing coffee on the porch. Nights sitting by the fire while Ethan read aloud from books Sarah had loved, sharing her favorite passages with Clara like gifts from the past. And through it all, the thing between them grew, unnamed, undefined, but undeniably real. Touches that lingered a moment too long. Glances that held more meaning than words. A growing awareness of each other that was both comfortable and charged with possibility. 2 months after Clara's arrival, Tom Brennan came by with his wife Martha, ostensibly to discuss ranch business, but really to satisfy Martha's curiosity about the mysterious woman who'd taken up residence at the McCrae place. Ethan introduced Clara simply as a family friend, which was true enough, if incomplete. Martha, a sharp-eyed woman who'd known Sarah well, looked between them with obvious speculation. "Family friend," she repeated, her tone suggesting she didn't quite believe it. "Well, it's good to see Ethan has company again. This place was too quiet for too long." Over coffee and cake, Clara had become an excellent baker in her time at the ranch. Martha's natural warmth won out over her nosiness. She and Clara fell into easy conversation about everything from recipes to the challenges of ranch life. "Sarah would have liked you," Martha said at one point, and the casual observation hung in the air like a benediction. She always appreciated a woman who could hold her own, not afraid to get her hands dirty or speak her mind. Clara's eyes went to Ethan, uncertain. He nodded slightly, giving her permission to decide how much to share. "I hope I would have liked her too," Clara said carefully. "From everything Ethan's told me, she sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Martha agreed. Then with surprising gentleness, "But she's gone, and life goes on. Took me years to convince Ethan of that, but I think maybe he's finally starting to believe it." After the Brennans left, Clara turned to Ethan with raised eyebrows. "That was subtle as a hammer." "Martha's never been one for subtlety," Ethan said with a wry smile. "She means well, though. She and Sarah were close. If Martha approves of you, that's significant. Does her approval matter to you?" Ethan considered this. "Her opinion matters. But what I feel, what we're building here, that's between us, not subject to community approval or disapproval." "And what are we building exactly?" Clara asked, echoing her earlier question. "We've been dancing around it for weeks now, but we never quite name it." "Does it need a name?" "Eventually, yes. People are going to ask, Ethan. Tom and Martha won't be the last, and I need to know, when they ask, when they wonder, what am I to you? What are we to each other?" Ethan moved to the window, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red. The question deserved an answer, deserved honesty, but the truth was complicated and messy and not easily put into words. "You're the person who brought me back to life," he said finally. "Who reminded me that grief doesn't have to be a prison sentence. Who showed me that honoring the past doesn't mean surrendering the future." He turned to face her. "You're essential to me, Clara. I don't know what label fits that, but I know I don't want to face another day without you in it." Clara crossed to him, her expression soft with understanding. "That's enough. For now, that's enough." But later that night, as Ethan lay in bed unable to sleep, he knew it wouldn't be enough forever. Eventually, they'd have to define what they were to each other. Eventually, he'd have to decide if what he felt for Clara was simply gratitude and companionship or something deeper, something that felt dangerously like love. The thought terrified him. Loving someone meant risking loss again, meant opening himself to the possibility of another grief that could destroy him. After Sarah, he'd sworn never to put himself through that again. But Clara had already slipped past his defenses, was already essential in ways he was only beginning to understand. The question wasn't whether to risk loving her, it was whether he was brave enough to admit he already did. The next morning brought unexpected visitors in the form of Sheriff Wade and a well-dressed man Ethan didn't recognize. They rode up to the house just after breakfast, and something about the sheriff's expression put Ethan on edge. "Morning, Sheriff," he said from the porch. "What brings you out this way?" Wade dismounted, gesturing to his companion. "This is Mr. Harrison Wells, attorney from Denver. He's been looking for someone, and I thought you might be able to help." The attorney stepped forward, removing his hat. He was a man in his 50s, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone used to delivering difficult news. "Mr. McCrae, I'm looking for a young woman named Clara Dawson. I was told she might have passed through this area some months ago." Ethan's heart lurched. He glanced toward the house, where Clara was washing dishes, hopefully out of earshot. "What's your business with Miss Dawson?" I represent the estate of Robert and Eleanor Dawson of Boston. There are matters concerning their will that require Miss Dawson's immediate attention. Wells pulled papers from his satchel. I've been searching for her for nearly 6 months. The estate cannot be properly settled without her. What kind of matters? Ethan asked, though he had a sinking feeling he knew where this was going. That's confidential between myself and Miss Dawson, but I assure you it's urgent and in her best interests. Wells looked past Ethan toward the house. Is she here, Mr. McCrae? Is Clara Dawson at this ranch? Before Ethan could answer, the door opened and Clara stepped out. She froze when she saw the visitors, her face going pale. Mr. Wells, she said, her voice barely steady. What are you doing here? The attorney's expression softened with relief. Miss Dawson, thank God. I've been searching for you for months. There are urgent matters regarding your parents' estate that require your attention. Legal complications have arisen that only you can resolve. What kind of complications? Clara descended the porch steps slowly, as if approaching something dangerous. Perhaps we could speak privately, Wells suggested, glancing at Ethan and the sheriff. Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Ethan, Clara said firmly, moving to stand beside him. The gesture wasn't lost on Wells, whose eyebrows rose slightly. Very well. It concerns your inheritance. When your parents died, their estate was substantial, but there were irregularities. Questions about your legitimacy as their heir, given that you were adopted rather than their natural child. Clara's hand found Ethan's, gripping it tightly. I was their daughter in every way that mattered. I don't dispute that, Miss Dawson. But there are distant relatives contesting the will. They claim that as an adopted child with no legal papers, the adoption was apparently informal, arranged privately, you have no right to the estate. If we can't prove your legal standing, the courts may rule in their favor. How much are we talking about? Ethan asked, his protective instincts rising. The Dawson estate is worth approximately $50,000, Wells said. Properties in Boston, investments, liquid assets. It's a substantial sum, and these relatives are determined to claim it for themselves. Clara swayed slightly, and Ethan steadied her. $50,000. It was a fortune, life-changing money, money that could transform the ranch, fulfill every dream they'd been planning together, or money that could take Clara away from him forever. What do I need to do? Clara asked. You need to come to Denver immediately. There's a hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. If you're not present to defend your claim, the court will rule in favor of the relatives by default. Wells's expression was apologetic. I'm sorry, Miss Dawson. I know this is unexpected, but your presence is absolutely essential. Clara turned to Ethan, her eyes wide with conflicting emotions. Fear, determination, and something that looked like grief. I have to go. I know, Ethan said, though the words felt like they were tearing him apart. I know you do. But I'll come back after the hearing, after it's settled. I'll come back here, to the ranch, to you. She was trying to convince herself as much as him. $50,000, Clara, Ethan said quietly. That's enough to build any life you want, anywhere you want. You don't have to come back to a struggling ranch in the middle of nowhere. Is that what you think? Clara's voice rose with emotion. That I'd choose money over this? Over what we're building? I think you should consider all your options before making promises you might regret. Regret? Clara pulled her hand from his, hurt flashing across her face. The only thing I'd regret is letting you push me away because you're too scared to believe this is real. Sheriff Wade cleared his throat uncomfortably. Folks, maybe we should— When would we need to leave? Clara interrupted, not taking her eyes off Ethan. Tomorrow morning would be ideal, Wells said. The journey to Denver takes 3 days by stage. That would give us time to prepare for the hearing. Then I'll be ready tomorrow morning. Clara's jaw was set with determination. But I'm coming back. Whether you believe it or not, Ethan, I'm coming back. She turned and walked into the house, her spine straight, leaving Ethan standing with the sheriff and the attorney. Wells looked between Ethan and the house with new understanding. She means something to you, he observed. Everything, Ethan admitted roughly. She means everything. Then you should trust her, Wells said gently. In my experience, women like Clara Dawson don't make promises they don't intend to keep. After the visitors left with assurances that they'd return in the morning to collect Clara, Ethan found her in the sewing room, packing her few belongings into the same satchel she'd arrived with. She didn't look up when he entered. "Clara, don't," she said, her voice tight. "Don't tell me I should take the money and start over somewhere else. Don't suggest that what we have here isn't worth coming back to. And don't you dare imply that I'm too young or naive to know my own heart." "That's not what I was going to say." "Then what?" Clara finally looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "What were you going to say, Ethan? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you're trying to give me permission to leave. Like you're already saying goodbye." Ethan crossed to her, taking her shoulders in his hands. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared that once you're back in civilization, back in the world you came from, you'll realize this was just a temporary escape, that I'm just a broken man living in the past, and you deserve so much more." "You're not broken," Clara said fiercely. "You're healing, and yes, you honor your past, but you're not living in it anymore. You're here, with me, building something new. Don't you see that? I see that you have a chance at a real future. Money, opportunity, freedom to be whoever you want to be. I'd be selfish to ask you to give that up for this ranch. For me." Clara grabbed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You're not asking. I'm choosing. I choose this ranch. I choose the life we're planning together. I choose you, Ethan. And nothing in Denver is going to change that." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I love you," Clara said, the words tumbling out like they'd been held back too long. "I love you, and I'm not going to let fear or distance or any amount of money change that." Ethan felt like he'd been struck by lightning. "Clara!" "I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated. I know Sarah was your wife, and I'm just someone who wandered into your life carrying a letter. But I love you anyway. Have loved you, I think, since that first day when you opened that envelope with shaking hands and let me see your grief instead of hiding it." "You're not just someone," Ethan said hoarsely. "You're—" He struggled to find words adequate to what he felt. "You're the miracle I stopped believing in. The second chance I didn't think I deserved. You're Clara, and you're—" He couldn't finish. Couldn't articulate the tangle of emotions in his chest, so instead he did something he'd been wanting to do for weeks. He leaned down and kissed her. Clara gasped against his mouth, then kissed him back with equal fervor. It was tender and desperate all at once, a kiss that tasted of tears and hope and promises neither of them had quite dared to speak aloud. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he whispered. "God help me. I love you too." Clara's laugh was half sob. "Then trust me. Trust that I know what I want. Trust that I'll come back to you." "I'll try," Ethan promised. "But Clara, if you get to Denver and decide you want a different life, if that money opens doors you can't walk away from, I'll understand. I won't hold you to this moment." "I'm holding myself to it," Clara said. "This moment, this promise, this love, it's mine to keep or break, and I choose to keep it." They held each other as the sun set outside the window, knowing that tomorrow would bring separation, but believing, choosing to believe, that it would only be temporary. That night they sat together late into the evening, not wanting to waste a moment of their last hours together. Ethan told Clara everything he could think of about managing the ranch in case anything went wrong while she was gone. Clara made him promise to eat properly, to not retreat into isolation, to remember that she was coming back. 2 weeks, she said. 3 at most. The hearing will resolve everything, and then I'm on the first stage back to Red Rock. What if the relatives win? Ethan asked. What if you lose everything? Clara smiled. Then I come back with nothing but what I'm carrying, same as I arrived, and we build our future from that together. You make it sound simple. Love is simple. It's everything else that's complicated. In the morning, Clara was packed and ready when Wells arrived with the stage. The ranch hands Ethan had hired years ago, but rarely saw anymore, had gathered to see her off, curious about the woman who'd transformed their boss from a ghost into a living man again. Ethan carried her satchel to the stage, his heart heavy with impending loss. At the door, Clara turned to him one last time. 3 weeks, she promised. I'll be back in 3 weeks. I'll be counting the days, Ethan said. She kissed him then, in front of Wells and the driver and the ranch hands. a kiss that left no doubt about what they meant to each other. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining with tears and determination. "I love you, Ethan McCrae, and I'm coming back to marry you if you'll have me." Ethan's heart stopped. "Clara, think about it while I'm gone," she said, climbing into the stage. "Think about making this official, making me your wife, making this ranch our home, making a future together that honors the past without being imprisoned by it." Before he could respond, the driver snapped the reins and the stage lurched forward. Ethan stood watching until it disappeared over the ridge, Clara's face visible in the window until the very last moment. Then he was alone again. But this time, the loneliness was different. This time, it came with a promise attached. This time, he had something to wait for beyond just the next day's sun. He walked back to this house, his steps heavy, but his heart oddly light. Inside, everything reminded him of Clara, the dress she'd worn yesterday draped over a chair, the book she'd been reading on the table, her scent still lingering in the air. On his pillow, he found a note in her careful handwriting. "Ethan, I meant every word. I love you, I'm coming back, and I want to spend my life with you. Whatever the Denver hearing brings, whatever the future holds, my place is here, with you. 3 weeks. Count them with me. All my love, Clara P.S." I think Sarah would approve. In fact, I'm certain of it. Ethan sat on the bed, the note pressed to his chest, and let himself feel everything he'd been holding back. Love, hope, fear, anticipation, grief for Sarah mingled with joy for Clara. All of it, the beautiful mess of being human and alive and daring to hope again. 3 weeks. He could survive 3 weeks. And when Clara came back, because she would come back, he had to believe that, he'd have an answer ready to her proposal. Yes. Yes to marriage, yes to a future together, yes to building something new on the foundation of what was lost, yes to loving her with everything he had, even knowing the risk, yes to life. Outside, the sun climbed higher, washing the ranch in golden light, and somewhere on the road to Denver, Clara was counting the miles, counting the days, counting the hours until she could come home. Home to Red Rock Ranch. Home to Ethan. Home to the life they'd build together, blessed by the ghost of a woman who'd loved them both enough to bring them together from beyond the grave. The first week without Clara felt like a year. Ethan threw himself into ranch work with an intensity that surprised even him, repairing every fence that needed mending, training horses that had been neglected, organizing the barn until every tool had its place. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from counting the hours until her return. But the nights were harder. The house echoed with her absence, every room a reminder of her presence. He found himself standing in the doorway of the sewing room, remembering how she'd looked that first night in Sarah's blue dress, exhausted and hopeful and carrying the weight of a letter that had changed everything. On the 8th day, a telegram arrived. Ethan's hand shook as he opened it, fear and hope warring in his chest. Hearing delayed, complications. Maybe another week. Missing you. Clara. Another week. Ethan crumpled the telegram in his fist, then smoothed it out carefully and tucked it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. He understood delays, understood that legal matters moved at their own pace, but understanding didn't make the waiting easier. That evening, Tom Brennan stopped by with Martha, ostensibly to check on the ranch, but really to check on Ethan. Martha took one look at his face and ushered him to sit at his own kitchen table while she made coffee. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, setting a cup in front of him. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" "This morning," Ethan said, though he couldn't remember what he'd eaten. Everything tasted like ash without Clara across the table. "He's lovesick," Tom observed with a knowing smile. "Seen that look before, usually on men half his age." "I'm not," Ethan started, then stopped. What was the point of denying it? "She's been gone 8 days and it feels like forever." Martha's expression softened. "That's how you know it's real, Ethan. When their absence creates a hole nothing else can fill." "I felt that way when Sarah died," Ethan said quietly. "That hole that nothing could fill. I don't know if I can survive that kind of loss again." "You won't have to," Martha said with surprising certainty. "Clara's coming back. Anyone with eyes could see how that girl looks at you, like you hung the moon and stars just for her." Unless Denver changes her mind, unless she gets there and realizes she belongs in that world, not on a dusty ranch in the middle of nowhere. Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. Ethan, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen. That girl didn't travel 3 months across dangerous territory just to deliver a letter. She could have mailed it, could have hired someone. She came because she needed to find you, needed to understand the man Sarah loved, and she stayed because she found something worth staying for. How can you be so sure? Because I watched her these past months. Watched the way she looked at this ranch, at you, at the life you were building together. That's not the look of someone passing through. That's the look of someone who's found home. Martha nodded agreement. And I saw how you changed with her here. You were alive again, Ethan. Really alive, not just going through the motions. Don't throw that away because you're scared. After they left, Ethan stood on the porch in the gathering darkness, their words echoing in his mind. He thought about Claire's face when she'd climbed into that stage, the determination mixed with tears, the way she'd kissed him in front of everyone, claiming him publicly, unashamed. I'm coming back to marry you if you'll have me. The words had been running through his mind for days, a constant refrain. Marriage. A second chance at the life he'd lost, but different this time. Not a replacement for what he'd had with Sarah, but something new, something built on its own foundation. Could he do it? Could he stand at an altar again, make those vows again, knowing how much it hurt when death parted what God had joined together? He looked up at the stars, at the vast Colorado sky that had witnessed both his greatest joy and his deepest sorrow. Somewhere under these same stars, Clara was in Denver, fighting for her inheritance, counting the days until she could come home. Home. She'd called the ranch home, called him home. The realization settled over Ethan like a blanket. Clara wasn't coming back out of obligation or because she had nowhere else to go. She was coming back because she'd chosen this life, chosen him, with full knowledge of what it meant, the isolation, the hard work, the simple existence far from society's comforts. And if she could be that brave, that certain, then he owed her the same courage. The second week brought rain, the kind of steady downpour that turned the roads to mud and made travel impossible. Ethan stood at the window watching water stream down the glass, worrying about Clara on those same roads, hoping she was safe and dry in Denver. Another telegram arrived on day 14. Hearing tomorrow. Relatives contesting everything. Lawyers say it could go either way. Dream of the ranch every night. Dream of you, Clara. Ethan read it 3 times, trying to read between the sparse words for her emotional state. Was she scared? Confident? Did she regret getting involved in this legal battle? Did she regret leaving him? That night, he did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He went to Sarah's grave with a lantern, stood under the oak tree in the rain, and talked to her. I don't know if you can hear me, he said to the simple wooden cross. Don't know if there's anything after this life, if you're watching somehow. But if you are, I need you to know something. The rain pattered on the leaves above, the only sound besides his voice. I love her, Sarah. I love Clara. Not the way I loved you. That was different. That was young love, first love. This is something else. Deeper maybe, or just different. Built on grief and understanding and the knowledge of how precious and fragile life is. He wiped rain from his face, or maybe tears. I feel guilty saying it. Feel like I'm betraying you somehow, but I also think, I hope, you'd understand that maybe you planned this, sent her to me knowing I'd need her. The wind picked up, rustling through the oak's branches with a sound that might have been Sarah's voice, or might have been his desperate imagination seeking absolution from a ghost. If she comes back, when she comes back, I'm going to ask her to marry me. Going to build a life with her right here, on this land where you and I were happy. And I need to know, I need to believe, that you'd be okay with that. That loving Clara doesn't diminish what we had. Ethan stood there a long time, rain soaking through his clothes, waiting for some sign that never came. But when he finally turned to go, he felt lighter somehow, as if speaking the words aloud had released something he'd been holding too tightly. Back in the house, he lit a fire to dry off and found himself pulling out the box where he'd stored Sarah's letters to him from when they were courting. He'd avoided these for years, unable to bear the pain of her handwriting, her words, her presence captured on paper. But now he read them differently, not with the crushing weight of loss, but with gratitude for what they'd shared. Each letter was a treasure, a window into a love that had shaped him, made him who he was. And in the last letter she'd written before they married, he found something that made his breath catch. My dearest Ethan, tomorrow I become your wife, and I couldn't be happier. But I want you to know something in case, God forbid, anything should ever happen to me. If I'm taken from you, whether tomorrow or 50 years from now, I want you to live, not just exist, but truly live. Find joy again. Find love again. Find someone who makes you laugh the way you make me laugh, who sees the good in you the way I see it. Don't lock yourself away in grief, thinking that honoring my memory means suffering forever. It doesn't. Honor me by living fully, by opening your heart to possibility, by daring to love again, even knowing how much it hurts to lose. I will always love you, Ethan McCrae. But my love isn't a cage. It's a gift, freely given, with no strings attached beyond this one request. Be happy. Whatever that takes, whomever that's with, be happy. All my love. For all my days, Sarah. Ethan read it 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Sarah had known. Even then, young and healthy and full of life, she'd known that love meant wanting the beloved's happiness above all else. Even if that happiness eventually came through someone else. It was permission he hadn't known he needed, permission he'd been seeking in prayers and guilt and late-night conversations with ghosts. And here it was, written in Sarah's own hand 15 years ago, waiting for him to find it when he was finally ready to receive it. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in his pocket next to Clara's telegram. 2 women, 2 loves, 2 chances at happiness. The past and the future, woven together in ways he was only beginning to understand. The next day was day 16, and Ethan woke with a sense of anticipation he couldn't explain. Something was going to happen today. He could feel it in his bones. He was proved right just after noon when a rider approached the ranch at breakneck speed. For a heart-stopping moment, Ethan thought it might be Clara, but as the figure drew closer, he saw it was a young man from town, probably bearing news. Mr. McCrae, the boy called, waving a telegram. Sheriff said to bring this right away, said it was urgent. Ethan took the telegram with shaking hands, fumbling to open it. The words swam before his eyes. 1. Everything. Inheritance secured. Coming home. Arriving day 19. Prepare for a wedding. All my love, always. Clara. Ethan's knees went weak with relief and joy. She'd won. She was coming home, and she still wanted to marry him. Day 19. 3 more days. He tipped the messenger generously and watched him ride off, then stood in the yard holding the telegram like it was made of gold. Clara was coming home. In 3 days, she'd be here, and everything would change. But first, there was work to do. Ethan spent the next 3 days in a flurry of activity. He cleaned the house from top to bottom, aired out rooms that hadn't been opened in years, and washed every dish and piece of laundry he could find. The ranch hands watched with amused curiosity as their usually solitary boss transformed into a man preparing for the most important arrival of his life. He rode into town and bought supplies: fabric for new curtains, seeds for a garden Clara had mentioned wanting to plant, a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother and sat unused in a drawer for decades. Martha helped him plan a small celebration, word spreading quickly through the community that Ethan McCrae was getting married again. Some were happy for him. Some were scandalized. Most were simply curious about the woman who'd captured the heart of a man they'd all thought was married to his grief forever. Tom found him on the porch the evening before Clara's expected arrival, polishing that gold ring until it shone. Nervous? Tom asked, settling into the chair beside him. Terrified, Ethan admitted. What if I'm not what she remembers? What if 3 weeks away made her realize she was settling? Then she wouldn't be coming back, Tom said simply. Women like Clara don't settle, Ethan. They choose, and she chose you. I'm 20 years older than her, set in my ways, probably difficult to live with. Probably, Tom agreed with a grin. But that's her problem to solve, not yours. Your job is just to love her and let yourself be loved in return. Think you can manage that? Ethan looked at his friend, this man who'd stood by him through Sarah's death and the long years after. I'm going to try. God help me, I'm going to try. That's all anyone can do. Day 19 dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that felt orchestrated by Providence. Ethan was up before the sun, unable to sleep, pacing the porch and watching the road for any sign of the stage. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Morning became afternoon, afternoon stretched toward evening, and still no sign of Clara. Ethan's anxiety grew with each passing hour. Had something happened? Had she changed her mind at the last moment? But then, just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western ridge, he saw it. A plume of dust on the horizon, growing larger, resolving into the familiar shape of the stagecoach. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He walked down the porch steps on legs that felt weak, moving toward the road like a man in a dream. The stage pulled up in a cloud of dust, and before it had fully stopped, the door flew open, and Clara jumped out. She looked different. Her dress was finer, her hair arranged in a style that spoke of city sophistication. But her eyes, when they found his, were exactly the same, full of love and joy, and coming home. "Ethan," she breathed. And then she was running, and he was running, and they met in the middle of the yard in an embrace that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. "You came back," he said into her hair, holding her so tight he was afraid he might hurt her, but unable to loosen his grip. "I promised I would," Clara said, pulling back to look at his face, her hands framing it like something precious. "Did you doubt me?" "Every day," Ethan admitted. "Every single day." "Well, don't." She kissed him then, deep and thorough, and Ethan tasted 3 weeks of longing in that kiss, 3 weeks of separation and worry and choosing each other despite everything. "I'm here. I'm home. And I'm not going anywhere ever again." The driver cleared his throat behind them, and they broke apart, both laughing. Ethan paid the man and retrieved Clara's luggage, considerably more than the single satchel she'd left with. "The inheritance?" he asked as they walked toward the house. $50,000, as promised. The relatives tried everything, but the judge ruled in my favor. "The Dawsons' love and care meant more than blood," he said. "I'm their legal heir with all rights and privileges." Clara squeezed his hand. "Which means we can do everything we planned for the ranch. Breeding program, expansion, everything." "Clara, that money is yours. You don't have to—" "It's ours," she corrected firmly. "If you'll have me. If your answer is yes." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The setting sun painted everything in gold, and Clara looked like something out of a dream, beautiful and real and choosing him. He pulled the ring from his pocket, that simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I found this while you were gone. It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, said to save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with." He held it up between them. "I gave Sarah a different ring, one we picked out together. But this one I saved. Almost like I knew someday I'd need it for someone else. For you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, I love you, Clara Dawson. I love your courage and your stubborn determination and the way you brought me back to life when I'd given up on living. I love that you see me, really see me, and choose me anyway." He took her hand, the ring poised at her finger. "Will you marry me? Will you build a life here with me, honor the past while creating our own future, and be patient with me when I'm difficult and scared and wrestling with ghosts?" "Yes," Clara said through her tears. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you, to us, to everything." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Then he kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it, knowing this was a beginning, the real beginning of their life together. When they finally made it to the house, Martha and Tom were waiting on the porch, with half the town it seemed. Someone had organized a celebration, and the yard was full of neighbors and well-wishers, all curious to meet the woman who'd won Ethan McCrae's heart. Clara handled it with grace, accepting congratulations and answering questions, her hand never leaving Ethan's. She told them about the hearing, about the victory, about her plans for the ranch. And when someone asked about Sarah, about whether it was proper to marry so soon on the heels of delivering a letter from a dead woman, Claire's answer silenced every doubt. "Sarah brought us together," she said simply. "Her letter, her sacrifice, her love for both of us. It led to this moment." I'm not replacing her. I'm honoring her, honoring the gift she gave me by loving the man she loved. And I know she'd approve. Martha stepped forward then, pulling Clara into an unexpected embrace. Sarah would more than approve, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She'd be celebrating. She never wanted Ethan to be alone, never wanted her death to be the end of his happiness. Welcome to Red Rock Ranch, Clara. Welcome home. The celebration lasted late into the night. There was food and music and dancing under the stars. Ethan, who hadn't danced since Sarah died, found himself swaying with Clara in the firelight while someone played a fiddle, and the community he'd shut out for a decade welcomed him back with open arms. As the last guests were leaving, Tom pulled Ethan aside. You did good, friend. Real good. Sarah would be proud. You think so? I know so. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Now go be happy with that girl. Lord knows you've earned it. Finally, blessedly, they were alone. Clara stood in the kitchen, looking around with such contentment it made Ethan's chest ache. I missed this, she said. Missed everything about this place. The smell of it, the feel of it, the way the light comes through the windows in the morning. I missed you, Ethan said simply. The house was empty without you in it. I was empty without you in it. Clara crossed to him, taking his hands. We should set a date for the wedding. I don't want to wait long. Neither do I. How about next month? Give us time to prepare. Let folks get used to the idea. Next month, Clara agreed. Then, with a mischievous smile, though I should warn you, I plan to make some changes around here. New curtains, a proper garden, maybe even convince you to fix up those empty rooms upstairs. Changes I can handle, Ethan said, pulling her close. As long as you're here, making them with me. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the lamplight. Then Clara pulled back, her expression turning serious. There's something I need to do, she said. Something I should have done the day I arrived, but I wasn't ready. I'm ready now. She led him outside, grabbing a lantern from the porch. Ethan followed, knowing without being told where they were going. To the oak tree. To Sarah's grave. They stood before the simple wooden cross, and Clara's hand tightened around Ethan's. I want her blessing, she said quietly. I want to tell her what she means to me, what she's done for us. Can we do that? Ethan nodded, too moved to speak. Clara knelt beside the grave, her free hand touching the earth gently. Sarah, she began, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks, I never got to thank you. Never got to tell you what you gave me. Not just life that day in Santa Fe, but this life, this home, this love, this future. Ethan knelt beside her, adding his own words. She loves me because you taught her what love looks like. She's brave because you showed her courage. She's here because you made choices that hurt, but were right. Everything we have, we owe to you. I'm going to marry him, Clara continued. Going to love him and build a life with him and honor the memory of what you two had. I'm going to make him happy, Sarah. I promise you that. And I hope, I believe, that wherever you are, you're happy too. Happy that we found each other, that your sacrifice led to this. They stayed there for a while, the two of them kneeling by Sarah's grave, speaking words of love and gratitude and promise. And when they finally stood to go, Ethan could have sworn he felt something, a warmth in the air, a sense of peace, a whisper that might have been the wind or might have been Sarah's voice saying what he needed to hear. Be happy. Love her. Live. Walking back to the house hand in hand, Ethan felt the last of his guilt lift away. He would always love Sarah, always carry her memory, always be grateful for the years they'd had, but he could love Clara too. Could build a new life without betraying the old one. Could honor the past while embracing the future. That night, as they sat on the porch in the darkness, Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. Tell me about tomorrow, she said. About all the tomorrows we're going to have. Tomorrow we start planning the wedding, Ethan said, and the breeding program, and which rooms to fix up first. Tomorrow we start building our life together, piece by piece. And the day after that? More of the same. Work and planning and figuring out this thing between us. And the day after that? Ethan smiled, understanding what she was really asking. Every day for the rest of our lives. Every day, choosing each other, building together, loving each other. That's what tomorrow looks like. That's what all the tomorrows look like. Clara turned to kiss him, soft and sweet. I love our tomorrows. So do I. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Clara threw herself into wedding planning with the same determination she'd brought to finding Ethan in the first place. She wanted something simple but meaningful, she said. Just family and close friends, a ceremony under the oak tree where Sarah rested, uniting past and future in the place that connected them all. Martha helped with the dress, altering one of her own wedding gowns to fit Clara's slender frame. Tom and the other men helped Ethan build an arbor for the ceremony, covering it with late-blooming roses that Clara tended with careful devotion. And through it all, they worked on the ranch. Used Clara's inheritance to buy breeding stock, to repair buildings, to hire hands who could help manage the expanding operation. Red Rock Ranch was coming back to life, just as Ethan was. The night before the wedding, Clara found Ethan in the barn, checking on the horses one last time. She slipped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Second thoughts?" she asked. "Not a one," Ethan said, turning to face her. "You? Only that we didn't do this sooner." She smiled up at him. "I'm ready, Ethan. Ready to be your wife, ready to build our life together, ready for all of it. Even the hard parts, the days when I'm difficult, when the grief comes back, when I'm not the easiest man to love." "Especially those parts," Clara said. "Because love isn't just about the easy days. It's about choosing each other when it's hard, when it would be simpler to walk away. And I choose you, Ethan McCrae. Every day, for the rest of my life, I choose you." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if even the weather was conspiring to make everything right. Ethan stood under the arbor in his best suit, watching guests gather on the hillside below the oak tree. Tom stood beside him as best man, and Martha fussed with the flowers one last time. And then Clara appeared, and the whole world fell away. She wore Martha's altered dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs.